Chapter 1108. Shinjoli's expression changed. Although the thin piece disappeared quickly, it didn't escape his eyes. It was like a dream-eating GU. This kind of GU could devour a person's dream, and then transmit the scene in the dream to the person who planted the GU. Because this GU's appearance was very similar to the flute membrane, it was very difficult to detect. And this GU was a top-grade dream-eating GU. The disguise technique actually made him unable to see through it. Shinjoli held the flute, his gaze turning cold. Who was the one who deliberately wanted to peek into a girl's dream? What was the purpose? Could it be Shue Ilan? In a deserted house. There was no path, the house was dilapidated, and the door was rustling in the cold wind. However, a red light could be seen faintly in one of the halls. A man in red was sitting on an armchair in the main hall. In front of him was a sparkling mirror. What was reflected in the mirror was not his peerless appearance, but a vast expanse of clouds and mist. It was very much like the snowflakes on a TV screen when there was no program on. His fingers were clenching the bronze mirror so tightly that his fingertips turned white. What was shown in the bronze mirror just now was Ning Xuemo's dream. In the dream, she directly transformed into Shui Yimo and Shinjoli's wedding. That big red 11 character and the big red wedding hall stung his eyes, making his fingers clench even tighter. Although he knew that those things were in the past and couldn't be changed, he still couldn't help but want to jump in and separate the two people. But he resisted in the end. His dream-eating GU had an additional function that no one knew about compared to the GU worms refined by ordinary GU masters. He could control the dream-eating GU to change the original scene in the dream, and change some things. But if he changed it, it would cover up the truth he wanted to know. This was not what he wanted. So he watched in the bronze mirror as they went through the wedding ceremony. Shinjoli was indeed arrogant. On the wedding day, he didn't wear the groom's red robe, but wore a white robe with plum blossoms painted on it. Only the red plum blossoms at the corner of the robe died a little happy. He watched them enter the bridal chamber hand in hand, watched them drink wine together, watched Shui Yimo hug Shinjoli's neck and kiss him, and even pushed him down on the wedding bed. In the dream, Shinjoli's expression was a little strange. He seemed to be struggling, especially that pair of eyes, as deep as the sea. In the end, he seemed to have decided something, turned from passiveness to initiative. He said a sentence in Shui Yimo's ear, Shui Yimo's lips, but Shui Ilan could read lips, so he immediately read it. What Shinjoli said was, "For him, are you going to fight for him? I'll help you." Shui Ilan's mind was shaken, and he almost lost his grip on the mirror. It turned out that at that time, Shinjoli already knew Shui Yimo's purpose of trying to get close to him, but he didn't expose it. Shui Ilan was a little distracted. When he came back to his senses and looked at the mirror again, he found that the scene had completely changed. It was no longer the red bridal chamber and the red wedding bed. What appeared in the mirror was Ning Xuemo's boudoir in the Ning mansion. On the big bed, Shinjoli was entangled with Ning Xuemo. Because Ning Xuemo was half awake and half dreaming at that time, the scene in the bronze mirror was blurred, as if it was separated by countless layers of fog. Shui Ilan couldn't see the specific movements of the two people, only two vague silhouettes, but these two silhouettes were as sharp as knives to him, making his blood rush to the top of his head in an instant. Chapter 1109. Naturally, he knew what had happened. He cursed under his breath and sent a strand of his primordial spirit into the bronze mirror without hesitation. He knocked on the door of Ning Xuemo's room with the power of his primordial spirit. This method of splitting one's primordial spirit consumed a lot of primordial spirit and couldn't be sustained for long. Therefore, after knocking twice with all his might, his primordial spirit returned automatically. He was so tired that he spat out a mouthful of blood and panted for a while. He was so dizzy that he couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. By the time he came back to his senses, he suddenly heard a blood-curdling screech coming from the bronze mirror. He raised his head in shock, only to discover that there was a flash of blood in the bronze mirror before disappearing. It was as if the bronze mirror's signal had been cut off. Ning Xuemo's dream no longer appeared. Needless to say, his venomous spell was discovered by Shinjoli and he destroyed it so that he couldn't peek into Ning Xuemo's dream from her previous life. Damn it! He slammed the bronze mirror shut and slowly walked out of the door. The snowflakes in the courtyard were scattered by the wind. There was not a single star in the sky, only rolling dark clouds. He suddenly smiled and raised his hand to catch a few snowflakes. He sniffed them, and this time, even his eyebrows were curved. Shinjoli, you stole Momo from me 3,000 years ago. How can I let you steal Shuemore again after 3,000 years? She will be mine. I let her down 3,000 years ago. In this life, I will do my best to make it up to her. I will pamper her and make her fall in love with me. Ning Shuemore woke up in a daze and her face was slightly red. She had a wet dream, and it was a wet dream that felt very real. In her dream, she and the Almighty had consummated their marriage and made love to each other. His kiss, his hands, his caresses. She had even tasted that piercing pain. The intensity of it felt like it really happened. When she woke up, she could still feel her heart beating very fast. She touched her burning face. Was she crazy about marrying the Almighty? She actually dreamed of this. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows and sat up. The brocade blanket slipped off her body and she saw the clothes she was wearing. It was a brand new and comfortable nightgown. The style was similar to the ones the Almighty usually gave her. It was a little conservative and even covered half of her neck. She stood there in a daze for a moment, and the scene from last night began to flash through her mind. The alcohol from last night was so strong that it actually knocked her out. However, she still had a deep impression of what happened in the restaurant last night. After all, she wasn't drunk at that time. It seemed that the moment she stepped out of the restaurant, the wind blew and the alcohol came back. She seemed to have almost tripped and fell into someone's arms. She sat on the bed in a daze for a moment before jumping up. Could it be that my wet dream was real? Was it not an illusory dream? The Almighty had sex with her while she was drunk. She steeled her heart and took off her nightgown to check her body. Then, she found that there were all kinds of strawberries planted all over her body, even in some sensitive areas. This was definitely not something that could be formed in a dream. Then, she felt a little sore in her lower abdomen and waist. There was even a strange feeling in that area. After all, Ning Shuemore had never experienced this before. All her experience in this area came from the internet or novels. She didn't know what it was like for a girl to experience her first time. She was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but look down. Then, she was stunned. There was blood under her nightgown. She was bleeding. Oh God. She really had sex with the Almighty. Chapter 11:10. She actually had sex with him when she was half awake and half drunk. Damn it. Her first time. It actually happened when she was drunk. Now that she thought about it, she didn't have a deep impression of it. Even if her ideal first time didn't happen on their wedding night, it should have happened in a romantic situation where both of them were in love with each other. Drinking a little wine, holding hands, and then it would naturally happen. She would remember it for the rest of her life. Whenever she thought about it, it would be beautiful. But not now. Now, she didn't even have a concrete impression of it. Too hateful. When she took the initiative to seduce him, he could even shout for her to stop in time. He was even better than Liu Xiaohui, which made her feel that the Almighty's self-control was very strong. But she didn't expect that he would sleep with her while she was drunk. What about now? Where was he now? Was he afraid that she would catch him and make him take responsibility and scare him away? Ning Shuemore was so angry that she immediately took out the directed audio talisman that the Almighty gave her. Almighty, you're awake. Since you're awake, then wash up and accompany me to attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding. The Almighty's voice was very calm and unhurried. Where are you now? Next door. The Almighty answered simply. Tempage, after sleeping with her, he ran next door to clear his relationship with her. No way. She had to get to the bottom of this. Ning Shuemore felt the anger in her heart burning even more, and her voice became colder. Almighty, why are you not at your Taoist master residence, but at my Ning residence? Shinjoli paused. This little girl was so angry when she woke up. Why? On a snowy night, I carried a drunk person back. It was very tiring. Your residence's housekeeper was very touched and felt that it was reasonable for me to stay here. I was moved by your sincerity and reluctantly decided to stay. I only let them clean the room twice. Why? Didn't you want to thank me? Thank you, my ass. Taking away her chastity while she was drunk. If she didn't like him, she would have gone next door and beat him up for it. Ning Xuemore smiled. Almighty, come here. I want to thank you in person. Damn it, this kind of debt was better settled face to face. It was inconvenient to make a phone call. The Almighty came over quickly. Just as she finished speaking, her door was pushed open and the Almighty walked in. How do you want to thank me? Looking at Ning Xuemore's messy clothes, he frowned slightly. Why haven't you dressed up yet? Did you carry me home because I was drunk last night? Ning Xuemore sat down on the chair, looking like she was in court. Yes. Did you take advantage of me after we returned to this house? Not bad. The Almighty was someone who dared to take responsibility for his actions. After a pause, he added, you pulled me onto the bed, Ning Xuemore. She was the one who initiated it. She thought about it carefully and realized that she had no recollection of it. She gritted her teeth. That's because I'm drunk. Almighty, you're not drunk. If you don't want to, you can easily push me away. Damn it, why does this conversation feel so weird? Shinjoli raised his eyebrows. Why should I push you away? It's rare for you to take the initiative. Ning Xuemore, she coughed and sat up straight. She looked at him like a cat. What about the Almighty? This time, it was Shinjoli's turn to raise his eyebrows. What do you mean? He actually pretended to be confused. Ning Xuemore was unhappy and leaned forward. Didn't you say that I can't be intimate with you until I reach level 8? Give me an explanation when I reach level 8. You can't control yourself now. If it's brought forward, what about the future? Chapter 11:11. Damn it, would it kill him to say I'll marry you? She even had to interrogate him like an interrogation. Shinjoli raised his eyebrows and looked at her. The intimacy that I'm talking about is not the intimacy that we're talking about now. You don't have to wait until you reach level 8. Ning Xuemore felt that her clever mind was confused by his words. Then what is the intimacy that you're talking about? Shinjoli paused. He felt that this girl was pretending to be confused. She obviously knew everything. But looking at Ning Xuemore's expression, it didn't seem like she was faking it. The intimacy that I'm talking about is the kind that has a physical relationship, just like what a husband and wife do. Shinjoli never thought that he would be able to share this knowledge with her one day. Ning Xuemore was angry. Don't we already have a physical relationship? You already took my virginity last night. Shinjoli was speechless. He obviously didn't take the last step, okay? She almost got internal injuries from holding it in. He looked at her from head to toe and then said, come, stand up and walk a few steps. Ning Xuemore didn't know what he was up to, but she wasn't afraid of him playing any tricks. She stood up and walked back and forth a few times. Then, she stepped on the chair next to the Almighty and leaned over to look at him. So what if I walk a few steps? Shinjoli looked at her imposing posture again and said slowly, if I really did something to you last night, do you think you would still be able to get out of bed today? Do you think you can still walk as if nothing happened? Ning Xuemore was speechless. Did the Almighty mean that he didn't really have sex with her? Then why did she feel that her waist was sore, her stomach was hurting, and even her lower body? Just as she thought of this, she felt a gush of blood coming out from her lower body. Her new underwear was quickly dyed red. Ning Xuemore froze. This feeling was similar to the feeling of having her period. Shinjoli also glanced at her blood-stained skirt. Menstruation? Ning Xuemore's pretty face finally turned red. Damn, her period, of all times, it just had to come at this time. It caused her to misunderstand the Almighty, causing her to make such a blunder. Before Shinjoli stepped out of the door, he patted her on the shoulder and said, congratulations, you've finally become a young girl. Then he slowly walked out. Ning Xuemore, what did he say? Was she not a young girl before? He wouldn't keep treating her like a little girl, would he? Ning Xuemore was a little suspicious. So I still have my chastity, I haven't lost my first time. Ning Xuemore heaved a sigh of relief, but for some reason, she felt a little disappointed. Looking at the marks on her body, the Almighty must have taken advantage of her crazily last night. but he was still able to stop in time and not take the last step. The Almighty's self-control was indeed not for show. Ning Xuemo thought that Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing's wedding wouldn't be too smooth and that there would be some small accidents. She didn't expect that the wedding would be perfect from the beginning to the end. The red wedding hall was decorated beautifully, and the guests were bustling with activity. The sound of firecrackers was deafening, and the wedding procession was draped in red decorations along the long street. Everything was the same as the crown prince marrying the crown princess. There was no deviation at all. Even Ji Yunhuang didn't have the evil aura from last night. He was wearing the crown prince's red wedding outfit. Although he wasn't beaming, there was nothing wrong with it. Chapter 11-12. When the music stopped, Ji Yunhuang reached his hand into the sedan and allowed Tian Xueqing, who was wearing a red veil, to help him out. He could feel that her palm was slightly sweaty. Her hand was warm and smooth. He helped her out of the sedan and transmitted his voice to her. "You finally got what you wanted, my crown princess." The small hand on the back of his hand slightly stiffened. Her palm was slightly cold. She transmitted her voice back. "Thank you, Your Highness." Her voice was cold and did not have any warmth. Ji Yunhuang felt an indescribable anger and transmitted his voice again. "Other than this title, I will not give you anything else." The small hand on the back of his hand stiffened. Her voice was still very faint when she transmitted her voice. "Whatever." Ji Yunhuang was speechless. He felt as if he had punched the air, and there was nothing left for him to do. His other hand, which was hidden in his sleeve, secretly clenched and sneered in his heart. A crown princess who did not receive any love from her husband would not have a good life in the crown prince residence even if she had the title. He would let her know the price of blindly coveting the position of crown princess. Amidst the sound of firecrackers and music, he led her step by step down the red carpet and into the main hall. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, they bowed to heaven and earth. When the last words of husband and wife bow to each other were said, the bride and groom bowed to each other, and the ceremony was finally completed. Not only did Lehin Thai breathe a sigh of relief, even Ning Xuemo, who was sitting at the head of the table with Shinjoli, also breathed a sigh of relief. However, her heart still felt heavy. Although the two of them were married, their future was still unknown. Could Tian Xueqing move Ji Yunhuang? Could she obtain the happiness she wanted? Ning Xuemo's gaze turned and saw Xue Mo's figure among the guests. She looked at the pair of newlyweds who were about to enter the wedding room and was somewhat lost in thought. The young girl's big eyes were filled with envy. She must be envious of the grandeur of this wedding. Ning Xuemo secretly sighed. What was the use of a wedding without love? It was just a show for the parents of both sides. No matter how grand the wedding is, it can't hide the heartless paleness. Tian Xueqing, I hope you can find happiness. The wedding ended perfectly. Shinjoli did not attend the banquet that followed. Instead, he left with Ning Xuemo. What are you thinking about? Shinjoli asked Ning Xuemo, who seemed to be lost in thought. White clouds floated in the sky while white snow covered the ground. Heaven and earth were one color, and the scenery was quite interesting. Ning Xuemo sat on Shinjoli's cloud. She looked down at the scenery below and seemed to have thought of something. I hope that Tian Xueqing and Ji Yunhuang's ending won't be the same as Yifeng's. Shinjoli didn't say anything. He just stroked her hair, smoothing out her messy hair like satin. Guru, aren't you good at fortune-telling? What was the ending of Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing? Ning Xuemo looked at him with bright eyes. Shinjoli's fingers that were stroking her hair paused. He only said one sentence, heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. TSK, he's keeping me in suspense again. I don't want to know their specific fate. I only want to know if their ending will be a comedy or a tragedy. Guru, you didn't say 2 words, so it's not considered revealing heaven's secrets, right? Whether it's a comedy or a tragedy depends on them. The Guru said a few words, but none of them were the answer that Ning Xuemo wanted. Guru, can't you tell? Ning Xuemo didn't give up trying to provoke him. To me, provocation is useless. The Guru remained calm and unfathomable. Chapter 11-13. Ning Xuemore shook her head. That's not right. I heard that there's no one in this world that great God can't see through unless you've already changed their fate and changed their fate. Only then will their fate be in their own hands and no one else can see it. But great God shouldn't have changed the fate of these two people, so there's no reason why you can't see it. Shinjoli's expression changed slightly, but he didn't say anything. This little girl was too smart. Other people could draw inferences from one case, but she could draw inferences from 6. The fate of those two, he had already adjusted it, a long, long time ago. Ji Yunhuang was the reincarnation of his most prized 5th disciple, Tian Xiaoshu, while Tian Xueqing's name was Ling Zai in her previous life. Tian Xiaoshu was a prince, while Ling Zai was an assassin sent by his enemy country. Ling Zai came to Tian Xiaoshu's side as a spy, but fell in love with him by accident and did everything for him. Tian Xiaoshu secretly found out about her identity, but he didn't believe her. He only pretended to deal with her and even used her as a traitor, causing her to be hunted down by her own country. At the most critical moment, Tian Xiaoshu saved his sister and then watched as Ling Zai was shot to death by the pursuers. Tian Xiaoshu always thought that Ling Zai didn't love him. It was only at the moment of her death that he realized he was wrong. He searched for Ling Zai's soul like a madman and begged the ancestor. The ancestor didn't want to change Tian Xiaoshu's fate, so Tian Xiaoshu left in despair. He didn't know where he heard that the ginseng baby had the ability to bring the dead back to life, so he traveled thousands of miles to find this fruit tree. In the end, he died silently in the stomach of the stone spirit. After Tian Xiaoshu died, Shinjoli was sad that his prized disciple had died early. He also felt that it wasn't good for his disciple to die with such regrets, so he wanted the two of them to have a perfect life. So when he recognized that Tian Xueqing was Ling Zai's reincarnation, he immediately used some means to give her to Ji Yunhuang. Tian Xueqing's meeting with Ji Yunhuang when she was young was also secretly arranged by him. According to the original fate, Tian Xueqing and Ji Yunhuang wouldn't cross paths in this life, so there wouldn't be any fate between them. Ji Yunhuang would sit on top of the world, but spend the rest of his life alone. As for Tian Xueqing, she would be treated as a pawn by her father and given to the sect master to be his second wife. She would live an ordinary life, emotionless and without desires until death. Now, because of his intervention, Tian Xueqing and Ji Yunhuang finally got together and filled up the imperfections of his previous life. He only hoped that Ji Yunhuang would cherish this hard-won fate and not miss it with Tian Xueqing. Defying the heavens and changing one's fate was a technique that defied the heavens. It could not be told to anyone, let alone to the person involved. Of course, he couldn't see how they would develop in the future. He couldn't tell Ning Xuemore all of this, and he didn't want to let Ning Xuemore keep guessing, so he pulled her up. "How's your fog condensing technique going? Show me one." "Test her." Ning Xuemore's eyes immediately lit up. "I've succeeded." Her fingers repeatedly moved in the air, and a moment later, a small cloud of mist was summoned to her. "How is it?" Ning Xuemore was waiting for the Almighty's affirmation. "It's just passable." The Almighty didn't hold back and said, "With this kind of mist, not to mention carrying you in the future, even if it carried an ant, it would still pass through. Continue to cultivate." With a wave of his sleeve, the small cloud of mist floating on Ning Xuemore's fingertips disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuemore was speechless. Chapter 11:14. She didn't say anything and just focused on her training, completely forgetting about Ji Yunhuang and the others. Shinjoli successfully changed the topic. He glanced down at the capital city that was far away. "Ji Yunhuang, I hope you can grasp your own happiness. Master can only help you up to this point." Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. Half a year's time wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. The structure of the 5 countries on this continent didn't change much. To others, this half a year might just be the change of the sun and the moon, but to Ning Xuemore, it was half a year of rapid progress. Her psychokinesis had reached Earth rank level 6 and was on its way to level 7. When she reached Earth rank level 6.5, Shinjoli told her that she could practice the Imperial Sword technique. She could finally fly by herself. Maybe it was because she had fallen from the sky too many times that it left a shadow in her heart. She had a good grasp of the imperial sword technique, but she didn't dare to practice it herself. Day after day passed, and unknowingly, a month had passed. Moreover, it seemed like it would continue to drag on indefinitely. In this half a year, the great god didn't just teach her in one place, but brought her to travel all over the world, thousands of mountains and rivers. Not only did her psychokinesis grow like a sesame seed, but she also gained a lot of knowledge and experience. Her horizons were also very broad. She finally knew that this continent was just a place for Shinjoli to stay. There were still many places he could go. For example, there was the Ageless Country, the Dwarf Country, the Giant Country, and so on. Chiyun Pavilion was a pavilion in the sky. The sunrise here was the most spectacular, and it was a great scenery. Shinjoli and Ning Shuamore flew into the pavilion hand in hand. She had been to many beautiful places. The cold moonlight on Mount Yuhua, the blossoming peach blossoms in Luxian Park, the clouds and mist in Changkong Country, the tall cliffs, and the slowly flowing river of stars on the astrology platform, but there was no place that could compare to this place. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. The sun slowly rose from the churning sea of clouds, radiating golden light in all directions. The layers of clouds were dyed by the golden light layer by layer, and gradually, they were plated with a divine aura. The Kirin happily played with the Luan birds that were dancing in the sun. Every scale on its body shone brightly under the sunlight, making it look like a golden Kirin. The red-crowned crane danced around the pavilion, its figure graceful and graceful. Specks of light sprinkled down, making it look like a dream. There seemed to be a faint singing voice coming from far away. The heavenly wind blew, and celestial music drifted in the air. It was truly a paradise on earth. Ning Shuamore and Shinjoli stood side by side, hand in hand, enjoying the prosperity of the mortal world. There was a faint, cold fragrance in the air, like a wisp of cold plum fragrance in the midst of the heavy snow, making one feel relaxed and happy. It was the unique scent of the Almighty. Ning Shuamore looked at the Luan birds dancing in the distance and couldn't help but sigh. Almighty, this place is really beautiful. How did you find this pavilion in the sky? Shinjoli held her waist and smiled faintly. Shuamore, do you like this place? His smile was like a lotus flower in the misty rain, light and elegant. Even though Ning Shuamore had been with the Almighty for so long, she was still often swayed by his smile. Ning Shuamore nodded and smiled as she snuggled into his embrace. She raised her head and her large eyes were as bright as the stars in the sky. She replied without hesitation, I like it very much. Chapter 11:15. Shinjoli lowered his head to look at the girl in his arms. Her face was flushed with excitement. His eyes lit up and his lips curled into a smile. He coaxed, It's good that you like it. Come, Shuamore, close your eyes. Ning Shuamore's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. The Almighty suddenly brought her to such a beautiful place to enjoy the sunrise together. Then, he looked at her affectionately and asked her to close her eyes. Could it be? The Almighty was going to propose to her. Ning Shuamore felt that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. Looking at Shinjoli's half-smile, she suddenly felt that the Almighty's smile was so devilish and seductive. She slowly closed her eyes. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly due to uneasiness. It was as if a black butterfly was fluttering up and down. Was the Almighty going to confess? Was he finally going to confess and marry her? Should she agree immediately or proudly say that she would think about it? If she agreed immediately, it would seem too unreserved. Moreover, the Almighty had made her wait for so long. She should be a little proud for once. Should she say that she would think about it? But she really wanted to agree immediately. Ning Shuamore's heart was in a dilemma. Suddenly, she felt something soft on her lips. A faint fragrance wafted into her face. Ning Shuamore was immersed in this kiss while her heart was in a dilemma. He kissed her. Next, he was going to propose. He was going to propose. Should she agree or not? After the kiss, Ning Shuamore's long eyelashes trembled slightly again. Her face seemed to be redder than before. Before she could figure out what to do, she suddenly felt her body become light. Before she could react, her body flew out of Chenyun Pavilion like a cannonball. The clouds in the sky came and went quickly. In the wind, Shinjoli's faint voice sounded, "Go, Shuemor. This is a good place to practice flying." Although the wind was strong, Shinjoli's voice was clear as if it was right next to her ear. It wasn't hard to hear the faint smile in his voice. "Shinjoli, you bastard." Ning Shuemor's exasperated voice echoed in the wind. "Go, Shuemor. Do you think you're throwing a pokeball, you bastard? After seeing the beautiful scenery and kissing, shouldn't it be begging? Marriage? Really? Why did things change so abruptly when it came to her? Almighty, where did all your romantic cells go? If it was any other girl, she would have already been toyed to death." Ning Shuemor complained as she channeled her psychokinesis. At the same time, she silently summoned her sword. A pair of shining ame pincers suddenly appeared under her feet, gently supporting her. Ning Shuemor was immediately embarrassed when she saw them. Because of this distraction, the flow of her psychokinesis paused for a moment. Her body swayed and she almost fell again. Other people were all sage-like when they flew on their swords. Why was it so funny when it came to him? Was there an immortal who could fly on two swords? It wasn't like she was skating. The ame pincers came in a pair. When she summoned them, she naturally summoned a pair. She just happened to be stepping on one with each foot. In addition, it was her first time flying on a sword, so she wasn't very stable. She jumped up and down, so she looked like a crab running amok in the sky. It looked quite funny. Stepping on two swords was a lot more stable, but, if there was a strong wind, she would definitely have to perform a split in the air. Ning Shuemor was speechless. She recited a spell and put away one of the ame pincers. Then, she shifted her weight to the other one. Chapter 11:16. The ame pincer shook violently, as if it was dissatisfied that its other half was missing. It almost threw Ning Shuemor off. Ning Shuemor cursed in a low voice after she steadied herself. The sword had become a spirit and was throwing a tantrum with her. Damn it. She tried to stabilize the ame pincer and slowly tried to fly with only the sword. At first, she flew in all directions and almost fell off several times. Fortunately, she reacted quickly, so she was able to escape danger every time. Time flew by quickly amidst this thrilling experience. After a while, Ning Shuemor was finally able to fly in a straight line. Her figure was also able to stand steadily on top of it. She looked like she was in the right situation. Ning Shuemor gave herself a thumbs up in her heart. She really was a rarely seen peerless genius in this world. Flying on a sword was such a difficult task, yet she was able to grasp it so quickly. Looking at the trajectory behind her, it was such a beautiful straight line. There was not a single bend. It was as straight as a plane. Moreover, the thickness of the clouds was uniform, just like a straight cloud road. Ning Shuemor was flying around proudly. Suddenly, a person appeared in front of her. She suddenly braked and almost flipped over. She stopped just before the tip of her sword touched the person. She steadied herself and looked up to see the person in front of her. She suddenly became angry. "Shinjoli, do you want to die?" Shinjoli looked at her quietly with a faint smile on his face. Only then did Ning Shuemor react. Her little bit of martial arts couldn't harm a single hair on the great god's head. She suddenly remembered the scene when Shinjoli threw her down. It was like throwing a Pikachu. When she was about to get angry, she suddenly heard Shinjoli's smiling voice, "Shuemor, you can't fly wrong." Ning Shuemor was immediately proud. She controlled the ame pincer to fly around him a few times. She could not hide her pride. "Of course, I'm a genius. You've found a treasure." The smile on Shinjoli's face deepened when he saw that she was like a proud little lion. He suddenly stood behind her and whispered in her ear, "Little genius, take me for a spin." His breath was right next to her ear, and his lips gently touched her earlobe when he spoke. Ning Shuemor's earlobes were very sensitive. Basically, they couldn't be touched. Not to mention being touched by the lips of the person she loved. Ning Shuemor was so agitated that she almost couldn't catch her breath. Furthermore, Shinjoli was standing on top of her with his real body. He didn't use any qigong at all. Because of the sudden addition of a person's weight, the ame pincer suddenly sank downwards. In an instant, They had fallen several hundred meters vertically. Ning Xuemore. Her heart almost jumped out of her throat. Damn it, she hadn't even activated the ability to carry people. She controlled the Ame Pisser in a flurry. The Ame Pisser flew up and down randomly. Ning Xuemore was almost flipped over. It was more exciting than riding a roller coaster. Shenjiuli stood behind her calmly, as if it had nothing to do with him. He quietly stood there, weighing the scales. Ning Xuemore almost wanted to kick him down. When did the Almighty become so bad? She tried to stabilize the Ame Pisser that was jumping up and down while complaining. Almighty, why are you so heavy? Shouldn't you go on a diet? Shenjiuli, this little girl actually complained that he was heavy. He hadn't even officially pressed her down. Shenjiuli's eyes darkened and his eyelashes drooped. He seemed to be seriously considering how to punish this little girl who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Ning Xuemore suddenly felt a chill down her spine. She had a feeling that she was being schemed against. Chapter 11:17. Before she could finish this thought, a big blue head suddenly appeared in front of her. Little Apple's eyes widened and he said in surprise, "Master, you can fly too." Ning Xuemore secretly comforted her frightened little heart and nodded. She patted Little Apple's big head and said, "Of course, don't you know who your master is?" Little Apple became even more cheerful. He flew a few rounds around Ning Xuemore and shouted excitedly, "Master, you're great. It's your first time flying and you're so stable and fast." Ning Xuemore couldn't hide her pride and said, "Of course, Little Apple, look, I'm also flying very steadily with the Almighty on my back." After saying that, she flew a few rounds with the Almighty on her back. She flew in a circle, and the circle she flew out was even more accurate than a compass. Little Apple's eyes were full of stars. "Master, you're great." Ning Xuemore looked at Little Apple's admiring eyes and felt even better. She raised her eyebrows proudly. Haha, with this skill, she wouldn't be afraid of falling off a cliff anymore. No matter how high she fell, it didn't matter to her. She could fly over mountains, plains, and oceans on her sword. She couldn't hide the smile in her eyes when she thought of this. She was already one step closer to the golden path of being awesome. "Master." Kirin's voice sounded again. Ning Xuemore lowered her head and saw Little Apple's bashful expression. He seemed to want to say something but found it hard to open his mouth. Kirin had always been tough and careless. When did he learn to be shy? Ning Xuemore patted Kirin's big head and said, "Little Apple, say what you want to say. When did you become as bashful as a female Kirin?" Little Apple raised his big head and looked at her with eyes full of hope. "Master, can you carry Little Apple and fly back?" Ning Xuemore looked at the fat and strong Kirin in front of her. He was dozens of feet tall and weighed a few tons. The corner of her mouth twitched. "No. Little Apple, you can't." Little Apple continued to plead. He hugged Ning Xuemore's calf with his front legs and almost pulled her down. "Master, I beg you." Ning Xuemore was speechless. No, I think." Shenjiuli raised his hand slightly and flicked Little Apple away. Little Apple was instantly sent flying. After a while, he ran back, feeling wronged. Looking at the enlarged Ame Pisser under Ning Xuemore's feet, it steeled its heart and stood up abruptly. At the same time, it said pitifully, "Master, please fly Little Apple back. Today is Little Apple's birthday." The moment Little Apple stepped on the Ame Pisser, it was like a plane being stepped on by a giant. It suddenly fell down in a parabola. Ning Xuemore's heart almost stopped when she descended 2,000 meters in just a few seconds. She was about to go crazy. No matter how much of a genius she was, it was impossible for her to carry a mythological beast that weighed several tons to fly. She was about to kiss the earth. She really wanted to kick Kirin down, but controlling the Ame Pisser had already taken up all her energy. She didn't have the time to kick it. Guru, hurry up and do something. If you don't do something, we'll fall to our deaths." Ning Xuemore could only ask the Guru for help. "I'm too heavy." Suddenly, Shenjiuli's words came from the sky. He still stood behind Ning Xuemore with an indifferent look, quietly hugging her slender waist. Ning Xuemore didn't react for a moment. When she did, she immediately felt sad and angry. Why was the guru so petty? Chapter 11:18. Ah, Master, you're descending too fast. This won't do. Pull me up, pull me up. Kirene felt that its master's heart was too strong. Even it didn't dare to try descending at such a fast speed. As expected, its master was the best. Kirene gave its master a thumbs up in its heart. Seeing that they were still a few hundred meters away from the ground, and then looking at the huge Kirene squatting in front of her, Ningxuamore finally couldn't help but explode in the wind. Little Apple, you stupid Kirene, get down. Her sudden outburst gave Little Apple a fright. Little Apple shook its scales that stood up from the fright and flew away unwillingly. It even asked, Master, did you specially bring Little Apple to make a drop tower? Ningxuamore had casually mentioned the drop tower when she was chatting with it. She didn't expect it to remember it. Ningxuamore's reply was to kick its Chilean buttocks. Oh Tilda! Little Apple howled and hurriedly flew away. Ningxuamore steadied herself when she was about 300 meters away from the ground. It was only now that she had the time to look at the scenery around her. Suddenly, she was stunned. The whistling cold wind, the vast snowfield, and the faint figure of the sun on the distant horizon. This place was the ice field. She had come here with a group of people half a year ago. It was polar night then, but now it was polar day. The ice and snow were still there, but the people were no longer there. She exhaled softly and slowly controlled the sword to get close to the ground. Then, she jumped off. She stood in the same place. When she saw the scenery around her clearly, her eyes dimmed slightly. In front of her was a vast snowfield. At a glance, it was boundless. Here, the wind and snow were still there, but it had already covered the traces of the past. Not far away was a cliff. Below the cliff was a vast sea. Ningxuamore walked up the cliff quietly. Her expression was indifferent, and her gaze was distant, as if she was reminiscing about something. Ningxuamore would never forget the scene of Yang Ziyuan jumping off the cliff with Yifeng in her arms. Those people, those things, those once vibrant scenes might have faded long ago, but they had always been in her heart. They had become a thorn in her heart, a needle that would jump out from time to time and stab her. Shenjioli gently held her waist and stood side by side with her on the edge of the cliff. Ningxuamore nestled in Shenjioli's arms, her eyes still staring into the distance. She softly asked, Great God, do you think they are together? Shenjioli tidied her slightly messy hair and said indifferently, Perhaps. Ningxuamore was silent for a long time. After a long time, she stretched out her hand and a green light flickered on her fingertips. In the center of the green light, a small white flower bud gradually bloomed. It bloomed layer by layer in a complicated manner. Kirene curiously came up to her. Master, what flower is this? It's so beautiful. Ningxuamore looked at the sacred and beautiful flower in her hand and said indifferently, Red spider lily, a flower that leads the way for souls. She continued to bloom a few more red spider lilies in her hand and threw them down together. A few white flowers floated on the blue sea, sending them far away, until the flowers completely disappeared. She and the great god turned to leave. Great God, I want to take a look at the bottom of the cave again. Shenjioli readily agreed. Okay. The two of them walked down the tunnel. Ningxuamore did not speak along the way, but the image of Yang Ziyuan stumbling while carrying Yifeng flashed past her eyes. It had only been half a year, but now it felt like a lifetime. Chapter 11:19. What was love in the world? It made people pledge their lives to each other. If Jiyu Xian had not cast the twin life curse on Yang Ziyuan, none of this would have happened. Perhaps Yang Ziyuan and Yifeng would have lived happily together. At that time, she only cared about Yang Ziyuan and forgot about Jiyu Xian. She did not know what happened to that bastard. The crystals in the cave were still strange. From afar, Ningxuamore saw a human-shaped object lying in front of her. She walked closer to take a look, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a corpse that was shriveled to the extreme, like a mummy that was all skin and bones, and its body was still wrapped in the dark and tattered fur of a white wolf. It lay there on its stomach, and it was so thin that its original appearance could no longer be seen clearly. Only the jade thumb ring he held tightly in his hand revealed his true identity. Jiyu Xian. It turned out that he did not escape, but died here. Ning Xuemore lowered her head and glanced at the corpse. It looked like he had starved to death. Ning Xuemore sighed. Serves him right. This bastard deserved to end up like this. Strange. She remembered that her acupoint sealing technique could only immobilize a person for 4 hours. If this bastard's acupoints were unsealed, why didn't he escape? Why did he starve to death without moving? She suddenly thought of something and glanced at the Almighty beside her. Did you do this? Shinjoli answered faintly, I just didn't want him to follow me. Well, the Almighty did well. The knot in Ning Xuemore's heart finally melted a little. She and Shinjoli walked around the cave again. No one would come here for a few years. It was as if everything had happened yesterday. She held Shinjoli's hand and wandered around aimlessly. Shinjoli looked down at her and sighed in his heart. Xuemore still had not walked out of the tragedy of Yang Ziyuan and Yi Feng. The greatest taboo for cultivators was to be too stubborn. Once they were too stubborn, they would most likely form inner demons. Shinjoli suddenly said in an indifferent tone, sometimes, the ending you see with your eyes is not the final ending. Ning Xuemore was sensitive enough to smell the hidden meaning in his words. She looked up, grabbed his sleeve and asked, Great Master, do you know something? Shinjoli looked at her with amusement. He patted her head and said, What do you know? I only said a sentence of Zen mantra. This little girl was indeed exceptionally intelligent. It was a pity that he could not tell her what happened to those two people. Ning Xuemore, however, after hearing what the Almighty said, the heaviness in her chest dissipated. Perhaps Yang Ziyuan and Yi Feng had already reincarnated and were now happily together. She turned around and hugged the Almighty's arm. Finally, a smile appeared on her face. Great Master, you're right. Perhaps what you see now is not the final ending. Shinjoli ruffled her hair. You're a promising child. Ning Xuemore smiled. Of course, I'm a peerless genius. She was interrupted by the great god. Ning Xuemore's depression dissipated by half and she became lively again. She held Shinjoli's sleeve and looked up with a smile. Great Master, I'm still missing the last ingredient for the golden sky pill. It happened to be on this ice field. Since I accidentally came here, let's go get it. Shinjoli patted her head. As you wish. Shinjoli's words warmed Ning Xuemore's heart. The feeling of being held in the palm of someone's hand was really wonderful. She tiptoed and kissed Shinjoli. Her eyes sparkled as she said, Great Master, you're the best. Moi. Chapter 11:20. Shinjoli pulled her into his embrace, lowered his head, and deepened the kiss. After a while, he let go of her, who was gasping for breath. Seeing her flushed face, he couldn't help but kiss her lightly on the lips. Then, he said calmly, Moi, we can more in the future. Ning Xuemore was speechless. The two of them left the cave and came to the ice field again. They walked forward leisurely. The wind whistled and the snowflakes fell, but the two of them were not affected at all. Ning Xuemore silently chanted an incantation and set up another barrier outside the one set by the great god. She smiled and said, Great God, you can remove the barrier. Let me protect you this time. Shinjoli looked at her with a slight smile. With a flick of his finger, the transparent barrier immediately disappeared. Ning Xuemore's barrier was set up quite well. It blocked most of the wind. When the wind reached the two of them, it instantly turned into little sheep, leaving only a gentle breeze. Ning Xuemore looked at Shinjoli proudly. Just as she was about to say something, she suddenly paused. She focused her attention and listened carefully. There seemed to be the sound of fighting in the distance. There were actually people in such a desolate place. She closed her eyes and listened carefully for a while. Then, she raised her eyebrows. There were not only two people, but they seemed to be fighting very fiercely. She had always been an onlooker. At this time, her curiosity was successfully piqued. She tugged on Shinjoli's sleeve and said, Great God, let's go and take a look. Shinjoli had actually heard it a long time ago. He didn't say anything because he was too lazy to meddle in other people's business. However, since Ning Xuemo requested it, it didn't matter if he went. The two of them finally stopped strolling around and began to walk forward. The closer they got to the place, the more intense the fight was. In the distance, a huge white beast was fighting with a person. Not far behind that person, there were two figures, one big and one small. Ning Xuemo's footsteps suddenly stopped. She immediately recognized the three people. The one fighting with the beast was Ji Yunhuang. Behind him was Tian Xueqing and Shui Mo. A man and two women were walking together. What were the three of them doing here? Why was he fighting with the number one overlord of the snowfield, the Snowflood Dragon? Because of Ning Xuemo's kick on the butt, the little Chiline's mood was a bit low. Its tail drooped as it dejectedly followed behind the two people. Seeing the two people in front of it stop, it suspiciously raised its head and saw the huge monster's silhouette in the distance. It excitedly raised its tail. "Master, this is the white monster that chased us last time. Master, let me go. I want to kill it. Last time, it chased me around like a pig and a wolf. This time, Little Apple is going to avenge itself." Ning Xuemo patted Little Apple's head, signaling it to calm down. Little Apple suppressed its desire to charge forward, but its beastly eyes were still staring at the monster in the distance. Its forelimbs were slightly arched, as if it was going to shoot over in the next second. Hey! Little Apple seemed to have suddenly discovered something. Its tail was no longer as straight as an antenna. After a while, it suddenly slapped its big head. "Aya! I was wondering what was wrong. Why is this one so big? I haven't seen it for half a year, and it actually grew a few rounds. What did it eat? It's so fat." Little Apple was right. This one was really too big. It was almost the size of 4 Kirin. Its huge body was indomitable. Ji Yunhuang and the rest were like insignificant ants in front of it. Shinjoli's gaze landed on the monster. He said indifferently, "This is the Snowflood Dragon King." Chapter 11:21. Snowflood Dragon King? Ning Xuemo began to worry. This Snowflood Dragon King looked like it had reached Earth rank level 9. Furthermore, there was a faint halo around its body. It seemed like it would break through Earth rank level 9 and become a Snowflood Dragon in a few days. Ji Yunhuang was Earth rank level 7, Tian Xueqing was Earth rank level 2, and there was also Shui Mo who was a burden. How could they fight against the Snowflood Dragon King that was close to becoming a dragon? Should she make a move? She already had a shadow in her heart. Yang Ziyuan and Yi Feng's tragic ending made her wonder if she was really a jinx. If she interfered with someone's matter, that person would have a tragic ending because of her. However, Ji Yunhuang was already surrounded by danger. Even Tian Xueqing, who was not of a high rank, no longer protected Shui Mo. She began to rush forward to fight against the Snowflood Dragon King together with Ji Yunhuang. They were really at the end of the road. Ning Xuemo's fingers unconsciously clenched tightly. Shinjoli, who was at the side, quietly looked at her as a trace of deep thought flashed past his eyes. He originally thought that she would rush forward without hesitation, but she did not. This was not in line with her usual style of doing things. She really had a very deep shadow in her heart. Ning Xuemo suddenly thought of something. She turned around and pulled Shinjoli's sleeve. "Great God, aren't you going to save them?" If she let the great God go and save them without her, wouldn't that be the end of it? Shinjoli looked at her and lightly said, "I'm not going." Ning Xuemo opened her mouth. Just as she was about to say something, he added, "But you can go." Ning Xuemo's eyes darkened. Her lips moved slightly as if she was swallowing something. In the end, she lowered her eyes and did not say anything. Shinjoli sighed and rubbed her head. He casually glanced at the situation in the distance and lightly said, "Ji Yunhuang will lose in less than 20 moves." Losing meant death. Ji Yunhuang's entire body was soaked in sweat. When the cold wind blew, his clothes instantly froze and stuck tightly to his body. He knew that he was about to lose, and once he lost, then he, Tian Xueqing, and Shui Mo would definitely be buried here. He couldn't lose. Although the gigantic beast in front of him was riddled with wounds, They were all minor injuries. It was still very spirited. On the other hand, his psychokinesis seemed to be running out, and his entire body seemed to be drained of energy. The snow flood dragon was impervious to everything. The swords and sabers only left a shallow cut on its body, which was not enough to endanger it at all. Moreover, the small but dense wounds angered the snow flood dragon king even more, causing its battle intent to soar even higher. The monster looked up to the sky and roared. Looking at the battered and exhausted Su Chen, it seemed to be sneering at him, laughing at him for overestimating himself, laughing at him for putting up a stubborn resistance. Tian Xueqing took advantage of the time when the monster's attention was on Ji Yunhuang to carefully climb onto the snow flood dragon's back. The snow flood dragon was so huge that it almost couldn't sense a tiny person like her. Therefore, Tian Xueqing wasn't discovered by the snow flood dragon king. However, when Ji Yunhuang saw the green figure on the snow king's body, his eyes widened. Does this woman want to die? He wanted to scold her and ask her to come down, but he was afraid that the snow flood dragon king would discover her. While he was in a dilemma, he saw Tian Xueqing gradually climb onto the snow flood dragon king's back. His face was slightly pale, and he suddenly coughed violently as if he was injured. When he finally stopped coughing, he awkwardly retreated a few steps. The person in front of him was already extremely weak, and he was about to have a good meal. The snow flood dragon king focused all of its attention on Ji Yunhuang, and every move it made closed in on him. Chapter 11:22. Tian Xueqing was also slowly approaching the center of the snow king's back. She had already seen a small reverse scale on the snow king's back. That might be its weak spot. Just as Tian Xueqing was about to stab its reverse scale, the snow king seemed to have sensed something and stopped in its tracks. It let out a furious roar and shook its body violently. It wanted to shake off this person who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and trample her to death. The snow king's sudden movement caused Tian Xueqing's sword to miss its target and only scratched the side of its back. But this time, the snow king jumped up as if its tail was stepped on. A pair of wings suddenly grew out of its back and it instantly flew up into the sky. It shuddered up and down. The scales on the snow king's back were slippery and there was no place for her to grab onto. Tian Xueqing hugged onto the reverse scale tightly. The snow king had already brought her up into the sky. If she was careless and fell down, she would definitely be smashed into pieces. Ji Yunhuang's face suddenly turned pale. He immediately flew over on his sword, wanting to save Tian Xueqing. However, the snow king was too fast and he could not catch up. The snow king was a strong snake since birth and was invincible in all snake nests. No creature had ever dared to touch its reverse scale, not to mention being held onto by it. It roared angrily and suddenly dived down. Its speed was as fast as a cannonball as it wanted to throw Tian Xueqing off. Tian Xueqing could no longer hold onto the reverse scale and her body flew out like a kite with a broken string. The snow king stretched out a claw and grabbed her, holding her in its claws. Her arm was cut by the sharp claws, and fresh blood kept flowing out. The snow king opened its bloody mouth and wanted to tear Tian Xueqing into pieces. Ji Yunhuang's speed was raised to the maximum, but he was still a distance away from the snow king. He could only watch as Tian Xueqing was about to be sent into the snow king's bloody mouth. Ning Xuemo wanted to rush out, but Shenjiuli stopped her. Don't rush. Don't rush. If she didn't make a move now, Tian Xueqing would be fed to the snow king. Ning Xuemo was just about to charge out without caring about anything else when she realized that the snow king had suddenly stopped moving. Then, it used its big nose to sniff Tian Xueqing and let out an earth-shattering sneeze. Then, it threw her out in disgust. Then, as if he was allergic, he sneezed 3 or 4 times in a row. What was wrong with the snow king? How could he throw away the delicious meal that was already in his mouth? Ning Xuemo heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, she was a little confused. Shenjiuli seemed to have noticed her confusion and said, Tian Xueqing is a medicine man. Ning Xuemo suddenly had an idea. This snow flood dragon king must be treating her like a plant. The snow flood dragon was a carnivore, and Tian Xueqing was a herbalist. The snow flood dragon must have thought that she was a plant that had turned into a demon. That was why it threw her out in disgust. Ji Yunhuang finally caught Tian Xueqing before she fell to the ground, but the snow king's strength was too great. He carried her and retreated a few steps before stopping. Tian Xueqing was in his embrace and the two of them were very close, but her expression was distant. She looked at Ji Yunhuang and lightly said, "Thank you for your highness' help." Ji Yunhuang looked at her in different expression and became angry. He coldly looked at her. "Do you think that this king wanted to save you?" Tian Xueqing's heart ached, but she still smiled. "Naturally, you didn't save me." Chapter 11:23. Her life was still connected to Ji Yunhuang's. If she died, he wouldn't be able to live either. If it wasn't for this relationship, with how much Ji Yunhuang hated her, he would have wished for her to die in the mouth of the snow flood dragon. Even she hated herself and hated her identity as a medicine person. When she was sent into the mouth of the snow flood dragon, she heaved a sigh of relief as if she could finally be free. She could no longer think about it, no longer humiliate herself. Unfortunately, the snow flood dragon also hated her aura and threw her back to reality. When Ji Yunhuang saw the smile on Tian Xueqing's lips, his heart ached for no reason. He suddenly flung her away and spat out a mouthful of blood. Tian Xueqing was completely unprepared and was flung away. She fiercely fell to the ground and the sharp stones pierced her skin. Blood immediately flowed out and the sharp pain made her want to jump up. However, Tian Xueqing only paused for a moment and her expression didn't even change. She had endured pain that was 10,000 times more painful than this, so she didn't care about this small injury at all. The Snow Flood Dragon King had already lost interest in Tian Xueqing. It was now interested in Ji Yunhuang, who was obviously exhausted. It was immensely proud of itself and felt that victory was already in its grasp. It suddenly had a cat-like thought and wanted to tease this prey at the end of its road. It opened its mouth and shot out a water arrow. Ning Xuemo calculated the speed of this water arrow. It wasn't very fast and Ji Yunhuang would definitely be able to dodge it. However, Shui Mo had unknowingly moved to the front. When she saw that Ji Yunhuang was in danger, she screamed and pounced forward, wanting to use her body to block the arrow for Ji Yunhuang. Ji Yunhuang was miserable. Originally, he could have dodged it, but now, he couldn't. The water arrow was already in front of his eyes. He could only pull Shui Mo back, but he couldn't dodge it. Yun Mo turned pale with fright. Just as she was about to cry out in alarm, a green shadow flashed by. Shui Mo's body was kicked flying, and Ji Yunhuang was sent flying along with her. Tian Xueqing kicked the two of them away and couldn't dodge in time. She could only raise her hand to block the arrow. The Snow Flood Dragon King's water arrow was very powerful and instantly pierced her shoulder blade. She groaned and retreated a few steps. Blood flowed down her body and she slowly fell to the ground. All three of them had lost their ability to fight. The Snow King proudly flashed its fangs. Those fangs sparkled under the sunlight, and Shui Mo fainted with a single glance. Ji Yunhuang's face was deathly pale. His psychokinesis had long been exhausted, and his physical strength was also at its limit. He couldn't even move a finger. Could it be that the three of them were really going to die here? He looked at Tian Xueqing, who was not far away, and a trace of unwillingness flashed in his eyes. Shun Zholi waved his sleeves, and Ning Xuemo felt a strong gust of wind throwing her out. Shun Zholi smiled faintly and said, "Go, Xuemo. It's your turn." Ning Xuemo, who was unexpectedly thrown out, was speechless. "Guru, do you dare to change your lines?" Just as the Snow King was about to open its belly and enjoy this delicious meal, a red shadow suddenly flashed before its eyes. Its speed was shockingly fast, leaving behind only an afterimage. By the time it reacted, Snow King, who dared to steal its meal? The Snow King roared to the sky and chased after the red shadow. Suddenly, it heard a delicate shout, "Little apple." It saw the red shadow throw its meal into the air. The Snow King was delighted, thinking that she had thrown its meal and ran away. Chapter 11:24. The Snow Flood Dragon King was only interested in the white figure on the right. It wasn't interested in the green figure on the left. It was a carnivore. It definitely wouldn't stoop to eating a plant. It hurriedly stretched out its mouth to grab the person on the right. However, the angle that Ning Shuamore threw it was too tricky. Its head swayed from left to right, unable to reach the person. Just as it was about to take a bite, a blue chaline suddenly flashed and snatched the person from under its nose. The Snow Flood Dragon King. Just as it was about to forget about eating plants, the blue chaline flashed again. Very good. Now there was no plant to eat. Ning Shuamore finally threw the fainted little girl to Little Apple. The Snow Flood Dragon King suddenly grabbed it. Just as it was about to swallow Shui Mo, the blue chaline flashed by like a nightmare. Then it successfully snatched the person from the Snow Flood Dragon King's mouth and ran away. The Snow Flood Dragon King flew into a rage. Ning Shuamore looked at Little Apple running towards the great god with the 3 people. She let out a sigh of relief. That was close. The 3 people almost became the Snow Flood Dragon King's lunch. The Snow Flood Dragon King spread its wings and chased after the despicable blue chaline that stole its lunch. Kireen looked at the Snow Flood Dragon King that was about to catch up. It was almost indignant. Why did its sacred and mighty chaline have to run away every time it saw a Snow Flood Dragon that wasn't even a dragon? Last time, it was still able to shake off the Snow Flood Dragon. Why was it running so fast this time? It was about to catch up to Kireen. Moreover, why did this Snow Flood Dragon grow wings? Who allowed it to grow wings? This was against the rules. Against the rules. Ning Shuamore pulled out the Amapissa and flew into the air. She stabbed it towards the Snow Flood Dragon King's reverse scale. At the same time, she shouted, "Hey, blockhead, your opponent is me." The Snow Flood Dragon King naturally didn't want its weak spot to be stabbed. It could only give up on the food that was about to reach its mouth and turn around to fight. It opened its mouth and spat out a ball of fire. It wanted to give this little person who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth a painful lesson. Ning Shuamore suddenly jumped back to avoid the raging fire. She made a sound of surprise and suddenly laughed. "Silly big guy, you're so pitiful. You're so angry that you're on fire. TSK, how pitiful." The Snow WM King was about to go mad with anger. How could the mighty and intelligent Snow WM King be associated with a blockhead? It swung its claws at Ning Shuamore. The little person who dared to provoke it just stood there with a smile, not even bothering to dodge. Ji Yunhuang, who was in a safe zone not too far away, felt his heart almost jump out of his chest. He shouted, "Shuamore, dodge." But it was too late. The Snow WM King's claw had already slammed down, raising a huge curtain of snow, and a strand of blood gradually spurted out. Ji Yunhuang's face was ashen. With that claw, would Shuamore still be alive? Tian Xueqing's indifferent expression finally cracked. "Shuamore." The Snow WM King suddenly jumped up with one leg. The claw that it raised was pierced by a wooden spike that was as tall as a person. It fiercely pierced through the Snow WM King's claw, causing it to jump around in pain. Wooden spike. What was going on? Everyone was dazzled by this sudden change and couldn't figure out what was going on for a moment. A red figure appeared in the sky. Ning Shuamore's red dress fluttered in the wind, her long hair fluttering in the wind. Her smile was beautiful and arrogant. "Silly big guy. Does your leg hurt? You actually dared to slap me." She was an Earth Stage Level 6 late-stage genius. How could she be slapped to death by it? Chapter 11:25. She had only used the wood element in the air to create a substitute. That fellow didn't even look at her before slapping her with its claws. Ning Shuamore had read a lot of comics in her previous life. She had already mastered some of the moves in those comics. When the Snow Flood Dragon King heard the sound, it opened its mouth and spat out an enormous water pillar. Ning Shuamore's figure flashed and dodged it. She raised her hand and instantly congealed over 100 wooden swords. With a shua sound, They flew towards the Snow Flood Dragon King from all directions. The Snow King laughed as if it was laughing at the fact that she wanted to use small wooden swords to hurt it. Didn't she know that the Snow King's fire could burn off all the wooden swords? It opened its mouth and spat out a fire dragon. The fire burned off some of the wooden swords, but most of the wooden swords pierced into the Snow King's body. The Snow King's skin was rough and thick, so it didn't matter if the swords pierced into other parts of its body. Only its back was guarded tightly, so only a few wooden swords pierced into its body. It was of the fire and water attributes, while Ning Shuamore was of the wood and fire attributes. In this case, the Snow King's attributes could counter Ning Shuamore's attributes. This round of attacks seemed to be ineffective, but Ning Shuamore didn't panic. Instead, her lips curled up slightly. This matter needed to be done slowly. The Snow King spread its wings and flew into the sky. It opened its mouth wide and bit towards Ning Shuamore. Ning Shuamore stood there without dodging. She smiled as she watched the Snow King rapidly approaching her. Just as the Snow King was about to bite down, it suddenly paused. This human tricked it the last time, causing a wooden spike to pierce into its leg. It hadn't pulled it out yet. It thought for a while and closed its mouth. However, it didn't expect the human in front of it to be real. Just as the Snow King closed its mouth, a green light suddenly shot into its mouth. The Snow King howled in pain as a long and thick wooden spike pierced its mouth. The pain was unbearable, and it even felt a little itchy. In its rage, it didn't think much and continued to extend its claws, wanting to slap Ning Shuamore to death. The moment Ning Shuamore sent out her wooden swords, she disappeared without a trace. Then, she suddenly appeared right above the Snow Flood Dragon King's back. With lightning speed, she condensed over 100 wooden swords and stabbed them towards the Snow Flood Dragon King's reverse scale. The Snow King seemed to have sensed something. It tried to dodge, but for some reason, it suddenly felt dizzy and powerless. Hundreds of wooden spikes pierced into its back, and 4 to 5 wooden spikes pierced into its reverse scale. The Snow King howled in pain as blood gushed out from its reverse scale. The Snow King tried its best to escape, but its wings were powerless. In the end, it could no longer support itself and crashed heavily onto the ground. Its back hit the ground first, and hundreds of wooden spikes pierced into its flesh. It howled in pain again, but this time, its voice was much softer. The snow under its body had already been dyed red, with a tinge of green. The Snow King's mouth also started to spit out blood, but it was all green blood that was suffused with an ominous glow. Ning Shuamore's attributes were indeed suppressed by the Snow King, but don't forget that she was also a poison doctor. In this half a year of cultivation, she hadn't been idle. She had refined quite a number of poisons. The Snow King's back had been poisoned by 3 to 4 different poisons, and the wooden spike in its mouth had been stained with a bottle of poison. Even though the Snow King had thick skin and thick nerves, it was still paralyzed by the poison. This gave Ning Shuamore the chance to pierce its weak point. Chapter 11:26. Today, it had gone against Ning Shuamore. In any case, it would either be poisoned to death or stabbed to death. After Ning Shuamore saw that the Snow King had indeed breathed its last, she clapped her hands and smiled as she gave the great god an okay gesture. It indicated that she had successfully completed her task. Then, she wanted to fly over to check on Tian Xueqing and the rest's injuries. Shunjiuli looked at her flying over in high spirits and smiled faintly. He waved his sleeves and a gust of wind blew her back to the Snow King's side. Amidst the whistling wind, Shunjiuli's voice was exceptionally clear, as though it was right beside her ear. Retrieve the crystal pillar from the Snow King's body. Ning Shuamore. All right, since the great god had instructed her, she would just do as he said. Shunjiuli had unknowingly appeared beside her and was leisurely supervising her. She was panting as she dug out the crystal pillar and asked, "Great god, how are Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing?" Shunjiuli casually said, "Don't worry, they won't die." Ning Shuamore. All right, as long as they won't die. Kirin flew over with the 3 people on its back. With a shake of its body, it threw the 3 people down. Ji Yunhuang sat on the ground and was about to meditate when he suddenly thought of something. He looked around and saw Shui Mo lying quietly beside him. He was startled and realized that Tian Xueqing, who was supposed to be beside him, was sitting in the snow some distance away from him. Her eyes were slightly closed and her face was pale. She was quietly meditating. She was severely injured, and her arm and shoulder were still bleeding profusely. Ordinary medicine had no effect on her at all. Only he had medicine that was specially made for medicine men. However, she was avoiding him like he was a fierce beast and was not even willing to stay by his side. Ji Yunhuang's heart was suddenly filled with anger. This must be her trick to make him feel sorry for her. She was even playing hard to get and staying so far away from him. He wanted to see how long she could last. In the end, she would definitely take the initiative to run over. Ji Yunhuang fiercely averted his gaze. He could not be deceived by her delicate appearance. Shui Mo groaned and slowly woke up. When she saw Ji Yunhuang beside her, she abruptly hugged his arm. Big brother Yunhuang. Woo woo, Shui Mo is so scared. Shui Mo almost couldn't see big brother Yunhuang again. Ji Yunhuang pulled her into his embrace and comforted her in a low voice. Mo, don't be afraid. Everything is fine now, Shui Mo suddenly hissed and her brows furrowed slightly. When she raised her head again, her large eyes were already filled with tears and her voice was filled with grievance. Big brother Yunhuang, Mo's body hurts. Ji Yunhuang's psychokinesis circulated around Shui Mo's body, but there didn't seem to be any wounds. Where does it hurt? Shui Mo said pitifully, my knee is bruised. It hurts. Ji Yunhuang frowned. What happened? Did Tian Xueqing not take good care of you? He couldn't help but look at Tian Xueqing, who was not far away, and suddenly realized that she was quietly looking at him. Her ink-black eyes were heavy and emotionless. Shui Mo shook her head. No, big sister Xueqing protected me very well. In order to protect me, big sister Xueqing pushed me out. I was careless and knocked against the rock. Ji Yunhuang coldly questioned Tian Xueqing. Is what Shui Mo said true? What else do you have to say? Although he knew that Tian Xueqing was also protecting Shui Mo, Ji Yunhuang couldn't help but speak sharply when he saw her indifferent expression. Chapter 11:27. Tian Xueqing lowered her eyes slightly and felt a stab of pain in her heart. After half a year of being misunderstood and wronged, she still had not gotten used to it. After a while, she looked up and her expression darkened. With an indifferent expression, she said, I have nothing to say. Ji Yunhuang was a little upset. Seeing that blood was still seeping out of Shui Mo's wound, he became even more upset. His voice instantly turned cold. Why are you still standing there? You pushed Shui Mo down and injured her. Why aren't you healing her? Shui Mo helplessly tugged at Ji Yunhuang's sleeve and was so anxious that he almost cried. Big brother Yunhuang, don't blame big sister Xueqing. Big sister Xueqing also has many injuries on her body. Are Mo's small injuries? Ji Yunhuang pulled out his sleeve. Don't say any more. Shui Mo was so scared that she kept quiet. Tian Xueqing suddenly felt that it was a little ironic. Was she so pitiful that she was pitied to the point of being pitied by a little girl? It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. I don't care anymore, it's going to end soon. Tian Xueqing silently walked over. With a flip of her hand, a sharp dagger appeared in her palm. Without any change in her expression, she made a cut on her arm. The wound that had stopped bleeding earlier immediately started to bleed again. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. He almost wanted to strangle the woman in front of him. His eyes were about to burst into flames. Tian Xueqing, are you doing this on purpose? You could have just cut a small wound. Are you trying to trick me? Before the old wound on her arm healed, new wounds were added to it. Bright red blood kept flowing out. It was a little dazzling for him. However, as if she did not feel it, she pulled Shui Mo's leg over and dripped the blood on her knee. The small wound on Shui Mo's knee emitted a faint halo. In the halo, Shui Mo's wound gradually healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as smooth as before. After Tian Xueqing finished dripping the blood, her face became even paler. It was almost the same color as the surrounding snow. She did not even look at Ji Yunhuang. She closed her eyes and quietly meditated. Ji Yunhuang was completely ignored. His face turned slightly green from anger. You purposely made this appearance for me to see, right? Tian Xueqing, you are really scheming. Tian Xueqing suddenly opened her eyes and smiled faintly. You flatter me. Although she was smiling, her eyes were filled with sorrow. How did she and he end up like this? Half a year of being the crown princess was like purgatory, and all of her love had been worn away. Ji Yunhuang choked. After a long while, he threw over a small bottle and coldly said, "Don't die on the road. No one will collect your corpse." Ning Xuemo almost wanted to slap Ji Yunhuang to death. What was he saying? She wanted to discipline him, but now was not the time to be distracted. Tian Xueqing's face was pale, and her eyes were as dark as ink. She kept smiling and nodded. All right, I won't die on the road. Your Highness can rest assured. With that, she picked up the ointment and applied it on herself. Her actions affected her wound, but she only paused for a moment. She didn't even frown before continuing to apply the ointment. Ning Xuemo had already dug out the crystal pillar inside the Snow Wm King's body. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Great God, there are actually 2 crystal pillars inside the Snow Wm King's body, one ice and one fire. Shenjioli took a look and waved his hand. The 2 crystal pillars were taken out and placed neatly on Ning Xuemo's palm. The great god's words were simple but crucial: absorb. Ning Xuemo could only sit cross-legged and slowly absorb the energy in the crystal pillars. Chapter 11:28. Water was wood. The crystal pillar nourished the wood element in her body, and the fire element was naturally absorbing the fire crystal pillar at the same time. As the 2 crystal pillars were gradually absorbed, Ning Xuemo felt that her power had increased a little. It was as if there was an endless amount of psychokinesis in her body. She looked at Tian Xueqing, who was applying medicine to her wounds, and an idea came to her mind. A green light was emitted and gently enveloped Tian Xueqing. After a while, she withdrew her technique and asked with a smile, "Xueqing, are you feeling better?" Tian Xueqing felt that the pain in her body seemed to have lessened a lot. She smiled faintly and felt a warmth in her heart. "Xuemo, thank you." Ning Xuemo smiled and shifted her gaze to Ji Yunhuang. She casually healed him and waved her hand. "No need to thank me." Ji Yunhuang looked at her with a complicated gaze. "Xuemo." Seeing Han Shanyu, who was beside her, his gaze darkened. He then asked softly, "Are you all right?" It was a normal greeting. Ning Xuemo was about to reply when Kirin suddenly shouted as if he had discovered a new continent, "Master, Master, don't you think this little girl looks a little like you when you were young? I was wondering why she looked so familiar just now." Ning Xuemo was stunned. She carefully looked at Shui Mo and her heart sank. She was wondering why she felt that this little girl looked so familiar when she first saw her. Kirin saw Ning Xuemo's slightly gloomy expression and his heart thumped. He immediately said loudly, "Of course, only a little bit, just a little bit." Shui Mo's face was slightly similar to Ning Xuemo's, especially the expression when Shui Mo tilted her head and looked at people. Ji Yunhuang's face instantly turned pale. He had found a substitute who looked slightly similar to Shui Mo. He originally thought that it would not be discovered, but he did not expect to be exposed in front of everyone. Shui Mo helplessly grabbed Ji Yunhuang's sleeve, as if she did not understand why everyone's gaze was suddenly focused on her. She shrunk behind Ji Yunhuang and said softly, "Brother Yunhuang." At this moment, Ji Yunhuang could not hear Shui Mo at all. His mind was filled with random thoughts. How would Shui Mo react? Would she cut ties with him? Ning Xuemo faintly glanced at Ji Yunhuang and sighed. "You should properly cherish Xueqing." Ning Xuemo didn't want to get involved in their affairs. She still remembered the last time she interfered, so she wouldn't interfere this time. She pulled Shenjioli's hand and said with an indifferent expression, "Guru, let's go." The 2 of them left hand in hand. Ji Yunhuang's lips moved. He wanted to urge them to stay, but he couldn't find a reason to do so. He could only stare blankly as the two of them walked away. Their figures slowly disappeared into the horizon. Tian Xueqing looked at him quietly, a complicated look flashing through her dark eyes. She loved Ji Yunhuang, but she couldn't get him. On the other hand, he loved Xuemo, but Xuemo treated him like a normal friend. It was truly a miraculous cycle of reincarnation. He injured himself, and Xuemo hurt him. This should be retribution. Tian Xueqing looked at Ji Yunhuang's pale face and suddenly felt a burst of joy. This joy was accompanied by heartache, causing her heart to tighten. She suddenly lowered her head and coughed incessantly. Her voice was heart-wrenching. She covered her mouth with her hand and coughed for a long time before she stopped. When Ji Yunhuang saw her like this, his heart was in a mess. It was as if he was annoyed, but at the same time, his heart ached for her. He asked dryly, "What's wrong?" Tian Xueqing's palm was a little red. She replied as if nothing had happened, "Nothing." She secretly wiped the blood off her palm on the snow. Chapter 11:29. She stood up and said indifferently, "Let's continue on our way." Ji Yunhuang stood up and did not even look at Tian Xueqing. He pulled Shui Mo and walked forward. Tian Xueqing silently followed behind him. The wind in the snowy plains was strong and Shui Mo could not stand the cold air. Ji Yunhuang set up a barrier to isolate himself from Shui Mo and the wind. Shui Mo mumbled, "Brother Yunhuang, Sister Xueqing is also very cold. You should set up a barrier for her too." Ji Yunhuang turned around to look at Tian Xueqing. Seeing that her expression was still indifferent, he turned back and continued to talk to Shui Mo. Tian Xueqing felt cold all over. The wind in the snowy plains was bone-chilling and she almost lost consciousness. She looked in front and saw that Shui Mo looked very comfortable inside the barrier. He was talking and laughing with Ji Yunhuang as they walked forward. A snowflake fell on her hair. Ji Yunhuang raised his hand and brushed it away for her. His every action was filled with affection. Tian Xueqing looked away. She knew that she would never have this kind of warmth. The cold wind stimulated the hidden injuries in her body and she could not help but cough again. Ji Yunhuang subconsciously turned around and saw her wiping the blood from the corner of her mouth. He stopped in his tracks. Shui Mo curiously turned around, but Tian Xueqing had already returned to normal. She pulled Ji Yunhuang's sleeve and asked, "Brother Yunhuang, what's wrong?" Ji Yunhuang's footsteps only paused for a moment before he continued to hold Shui Mo's hand and walked forward. He said calmly, "Nothing." However, when Shui Mo spoke to him again, Ji Yunhuang would only answer one sentence out of every 10 sentences she said. He seemed to be absent-minded. After a while, Ji Yunhuang suddenly raised his hand and a white light instantly enveloped Tian Xueqing. The wind and snow around her immediately weakened. Did Ji Yunhuang set up a barrier for her? Tian Xueqing looked at him in astonishment. After a while, she quietly said, "Thank you, Your Highness." Ji Yunhuang did not pay attention to her and continued to talk with Shui Mo. Tian Xueqing's voice floated in the wind and sounded a little lonely. She slightly lowered her eyes and told herself not to think too much. He was just taking pity on her. Her warm heart turned cold again, just like the words that fell into the wind and no one answered. The three of them walked for another half a day. After all, Shui Mo was still a child and could not endure such trekking. She could not take it anymore and staggered. If Ji Yunhuang had not caught her in time, she would have fallen to the ground. Shui Mo looked at Ji Yunhuang pitifully. "Big brother Yunhuang, our Mo is so tired." Ji Yunhuang looked at the frail Tian Xueqing behind him and said, "Then let's rest for a while." The three of them sat down. Tian Xueqing and Ji Yunhuang were meditating, but Shui Mo couldn't sit still at all. Ji Yunhuang made her move so much that he almost suffered from qi deviation. He opened his eyes helplessly and asked, "Ah Mo, what's wrong? Where do you feel uncomfortable?" Ink Shui shook his head like a rattledrum. "No, Ah Mo is very good." Before he could finish, his stomach growled. "Shui Mo," she patted her stomach in annoyance and said anxiously, "Ah Mo is not hungry at all." Not to be outdone, his stomach growled again. This time, it was very loud. Even Tian Xueqing, who was meditating not far away, opened her eyes and quietly looked at them. Ji Yunhuang, he helplessly patted Shui Mo's head. Wait. He turned his head and said to Tian Xueqing, who was not far away, take good care of her. They had already finished their food, so they could only hunt by themselves. Chapter 11:30. He had just walked a short distance when he suddenly felt the ground shaking. He almost couldn't stand still. Ah! Brother Yunhuang, save me! Shui Mo suddenly screamed. Ji Yunhuang turned his head and saw that the ground had suddenly split open and Shui Mo had instantly fallen in. Xueqing was not far from him. She flashed to the edge of the crack and seemed to want to jump in as well. Ji Yunhuang's expression changed. What are you doing? Get out of the way. However, Tian Xueqing's figure only paused for a moment before she decisively jumped down. Ji Yunhuang only managed to grab a piece of her clothes. With a ripping sound, her clothes were torn apart, leaving only a small piece of cloth in his hand. It still carried the faint warmth of her body. He looked down and saw that the crevice was so deep that he couldn't see the bottom. The two people had already disappeared. Shui Mo. Xueqing, just as he steeled his heart and was about to jump down, the ground suddenly shook again, and the crack in the ground closed up like a huge mouth. From the moment the ground shook to when the dust settled, everything happened in less than 10 seconds. In less than 10 seconds, everything returned to normal, but two people were missing. Ji Yunhuang's mind was blank. His mind was filled with Tian Xueqing's resolute figure when she jumped down. What was she doing? Was she going to kill herself to take revenge on him? This thought made Ji Yunhuang's hands and feet tremble. He wanted to use magic to open the crack, but he was afraid that he would hurt the two people underground. In the end, he could only use his hands to open the crack. Tian Xueqing did not jump down to save Shui Mo. She was not so kind and magnanimous that she would risk her life to save a girl who was intimate with Ji Yunhuang every day. Saving her was just on the way. She jumped down because she saw the serene orchid grass on the cliff. This was the purpose of their group. Tian Xueqing had already done the preliminary work. As long as she took the serene orchid grass and fed it to Ji Yunhuang, he would no longer have to be affectionate with her every 2 days. He would no longer have to look at her as if she was his mortal enemy. She would be able to set him free and let herself go. It was time for this petty and unrequited love to end. After she saved Shui Mo, she jumped up and took down the serene orchid grass with a few leaps. She lightly tapped on the cliff and flew up. However, she did not expect the crack to close instantly. She watched helplessly as the path to survival closed before her eyes. She was shocked, and her psychic power dissipated, causing her to fall. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and kicked the cave wall with her toes to slow down the speed of her fall. Otherwise, she would have fallen to her death. Just as they were about to land on the ground, she saw Shui Mo looking at her with teary eyes in the light of the orchids. That look reminded her of the time when she was 14 years old, when she was faced with a treacherous person in despair. He couldn't bear to see her like this, so he pulled her into his embrace. Bang! Tian Xueqing crashed heavily onto the ground. The gravel on the ground pierced into Tian Xueqing's body. Tian Xueqing's face paled. She didn't even need to look to know that her back had been pierced into a mess. Shui Mo was protected in Tian Xueqing's arms, so he didn't suffer any injuries. However, he was too frightened and didn't dare to move. Tian Xueqing felt pain all over her body. She sucked in a breath of cold air and frowned. Her face turned even paler. Shui Mo asked with a trembling voice, "Sister Xueqing, what's wrong?" Tian Xueqing only recovered after a long time. She whispered, "Get down." Shui Mo was stunned for a moment before he scrambled down from her body. He reached out his small hand to Tian Xueqing and said, "Sister Xueqing, let me help you up." Chapter 11:31. Tian Xueqing ignored the outstretched hand and slowly got up. Every time she moved, she felt a heart-wrenching pain. She bit her lips until they bled. Finally, She sat up slowly and passed a small bottle to Shui Mo. She said calmly, "Help me apply the medicine. My back." Shui Mo took the small bottle and turned it to Tian Xueqing's back. "Sister Xueqing, let me help you take off your shirt." When Shui Mo saw the bloody wounds on her back, he was so scared that his hands trembled. He gently touched her back and asked, "Sister Xueqing, does it hurt?" She was on the verge of tears. Tian Xueqing did not say anything. She sat there quietly and meditated to heal herself. Shui Mo applied the medicine bit by bit. She was inexperienced and accidentally hurt Tian Xueqing a few times, causing Tian Xueqing's body to stiffen. However, Tian Xueqing recovered in an instant and allowed her to continue applying the medicine. There was only her and Shui Mo in this place. There was no better choice, so she could only let this newbie do it. After applying the medicine, Shui Mo tore off her clothes and wanted to bandage Tian Xueqing's wounds. Tian Xueqing said quietly, "There's no need. Help me put on my clothes." Shui Mo did as she was told and sat beside her. Tears rolled down her cheeks and were about to fall. Her voice trembled slightly. "Sister Xueqing, will we die here?" Tian Xueqing said calmly, "No." Shui Mo's eyes lit up. "Sister Xueqing, when can we leave?" Tian Xueqing only said one word. "Wait." After saying that, she closed her eyes and sat there quietly. She began to regulate her breathing and heal herself. Shui Mo wanted to say something, but when she saw Tian Xueqing's cold expression, she was so scared that she did not dare to say anything. She sat close to Tian Xueqing, as if she was afraid that someone would take her away. After all, she was still a child. In a situation where she was tired, hungry, and scared, her head started to nod. In the end, her head tilted and she leaned on Tian Xueqing's body. She had already fallen asleep. Tian Xueqing glanced at her and let her lean on her to sleep. Tian Xueqing circulated her energy for a while and finally felt that her body was not as painful. Perhaps it was because of the medicine, the wounds on her back were not as painful. Suddenly, a tentacle emerged from the ground and wrapped around Shui Mo's foot. He pulled her down. Shui Mo suddenly woke up. Seeing the tentacles around his ankle, he hurriedly struggled, but failed to break free. He was so frightened that he burst into tears. She hugged Tian Xueqing's arm. "Sister Xueqing, save me." Tian Xueqing was startled awake from her meditation. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw a tentacle sticking out of her. Startled, she broke free from Shui Mo's hand and retreated. At the same time, she drew her sword. The tentacle suddenly attacked, but was cut down by her sword. She leaped in front of Shui Mo, and Shui Mo's left leg had already sunk in. Tian Xueqing picked up Shui Mo and tried to pull him out, but he couldn't move at all. But in vain, it sank down a little more. Tian Xueqing looked at Shui Mo, who was scared out of his wits and crying out loud. A look of pity flashed across her eyes. She then pulled out her sword and said softly, "Bear with it." Blood splattered everywhere. Shui Mo screamed and fainted from the pain. Tian Xueqing picked Shui Mo up and hit a few of her major acupoints to stop the bleeding. Then, she cut off the tentacle that was following closely behind. She suddenly leaped up. Shui Mo's broken leg was still bleeding profusely. This caused the tentacles to chase after them even more crazily. In the vast ice field, there were countless monsters. Tian Xueqing couldn't figure out what these tentacles were. Chapter 1132. The speed of this thing was extremely fast. It danced under her feet and almost entangled Tian Xueqing's feet. Tian Xueqing knew that only by throwing Shui Mo away would she have a chance to survive. However, looking at the little girl in her arms, she could not bear to do so. She was the girl that Ji Yunhuang loved and cared for with all his heart. If she died, Ji Yunhuang would be very sad. Forget it, she would just do one last thing for Ji Yunhuang. Tian Xueqing hugged Shui Mo tightly. She stepped on the wall of the cave and flew up a little. The number of tentacles below her had reached more than 100, densely packed like snakes as they chased after her. There were a few times when they almost pulled Tian Xueqing down. Luckily, she reacted quickly and avoided them. Suddenly, a ray of light appeared. The ray of light became bigger and bigger, closer, closer and closer. She was already very close to the top of the cave. When Tian Xueqing arrived, the entrance of the cave was already big enough for two people to pass through. She suddenly jumped up. Her eyes lit up, but her body suddenly sank. Her heart tightened as she felt a tentacle coiling around her ankle. Xueqing. Tian Xueqing reacted quickly. She threw Shui Mo away and stabbed her sword into the ground. Half of her body was stuck at the entrance of the cave. Ji Yunhuang hugged her with his hands full of blood. His voice trembled as he said, Xueqing. The moment he saw her head, Ji Yunhuang was ecstatic. He hugged her tightly and tried his best to pull her out. At this moment, Tian Xueqing's body was already entangled with more than 100 tentacles. He could not pull her out at all. He could only watch her body sink bit by bit. Ji Yunhuang hugged her tightly and did not let go. He used so much strength that his veins popped out. However, he was still unable to stop her from sinking. The pain of losing her forever spread wildly in his heart. His voice was trembling as he said, Xueqing, Xueqing. Tian Xueqing's body sank bit by bit. Ji Yunhuang hugged her tightly and his body sank as well. Let go. Tian Xueqing suddenly shouted. If he did not let go, both of them would fall down. Xueqing. Ji Yunhuang was not willing to let go. He grabbed her tightly and said, I'll carry you up. If he carried her, both of them could only fall down. Tian Xueqing raised her finger. A bright light flew up and went straight for Ji Yunhuang's chest. Ji Yunhuang was shocked and his body flashed. Tian Xueqing, who was in his arms, suddenly sank down. Ji Yunhuang hurriedly tried to grab her again, but he only managed to grab one of her hands. At this moment, there were 100 tentacles wrapped around her body. The ground was dark and boundless, but Tian Xueqing's eyes were astonishingly bright, like stars in the cold night. She even smiled. Your Highness, you don't have to collect my corpse now. That smile was like an epiphyllum in the cold night, blooming in an instant with a cool fragrance. The few times Ji Yunhuang smiled at her was a long time ago. Although she was cold at that time, she was passionate about him. Since when did she gradually lose her smile? She became more and more distant from him, and the way she looked at him became more and more indifferent, as if she was looking at a complete stranger. And since when did his eyes start to revolve around her more and more? Her distant gaze almost drove him crazy. He began to spend all day with Shui Mo, just to see her indifferent expression crack and change into one of jealousy or sadness. It would be fine as long as she was not so indifferent to him. But she did not even once. Tian Xueqing only looked at them quietly. Under her indifferent gaze, for the first time, he felt like a clown. Chapter 1133. Now, he finally saw her smile again, but he did not expect that it would be the last time. Ji Yunhuang's heart ached so much that he curled up into a ball. The pain caused his whole body to tremble, and he almost lost his grip on her hand. Tian Xueqing said softly, Your Highness, I have placed the serene orchid grass on Shui Mo. You don't have to worry. There was no need to hold on so tightly. Even if she died, she would not be a hindrance to him anymore. Her mission had already been completed. Ji Yunhuang's voice trembled strangely. It sounded like he was crying and laughing at the same time. Xueqing, forgive me. Tian Xueqing smiled and shook her head. Let's not meet again in the next life. Feeling Tian Xueqing slowly let go of his hand, the usually calm Ji Yunhuang could no longer remain calm. His face was filled with panic, and his voice trembled. Xueqing, don't let go. This prince orders you not to let go. Tian Xueqing smiled and shook her head. Her expression was relaxed, as if she had finally been freed. She looked at him one last time and said, Xueqing is already dead. A new person can be appointed. Be happy for 100 years and have many children and grandchildren. Then, she let go of his hand and fell into the endless abyss. Xueqing. The last thing Tian Xueqing saw was Ji Yunhuang's red eyes and a hideous expression of pain. The crack in the ground that he had painstakingly dug closed again. Ji Yunhuang stood there in a daze. Her last smile flashed before his eyes. He thought that she would pester him for a lifetime and that she would never let go of his hand, but he did not expect that. Tian Xueqing, didn't you want the position of crown princess? Why did you let go? Why did you let go? Ji Yunhuang suddenly looked like a madman as he dug at the crack in the ground. Tian Xueqing, I won't allow you to give up. I won't allow you to give up. Tian Xueqing, come back. Ning Xuemo's imperial sword technique was already quite stable. After she and Shen Zholi collected herbs from the ice plains, they went to several places to train. When the two of them returned to the Sun Moon sect, 2 to 3 months had already passed. Ning Xuemo had also successfully advanced and was now at Earth rank level 7. The two of them went straight to the heavenly sound peak. Shen Zholi's sound-transmitting talisman suddenly rang. He picked it up and said indifferently, "What's the matter?" Yelu Jing'an's gentle voice came from the talisman, "Master, Ji Yunhuang requests an audience." Shen Zholi frowned slightly. After a while, he said, "Approved." Ji Yunhuang's sudden request for an audience made Ning Xuemo's heart sink. Could something have happened? When Ji Yunhuang walked in, Ning Xuemo's eyes widened in shock. Was the person in front of her really that lofty and arrogant crown prince, Ji Yunhuang? His face was pale and haggard, and his eyes were empty. He looked like he had lost his soul. Ning Xuemo's heart sank even more. She asked, "Yunhuang, what happened to you?" Ji Yunhuang glanced at Ning Xuemo and revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. "Xuemo. Xueqing is dead." Ning Xuemo suddenly stood up. Xueqing is dead. Such a good girl, a girl who loved Ji Yunhuang so deeply, was actually dead. Ning Xuemo slowly sat back down in her chair. She was in a daze. Ji Yunhuang suddenly started coughing violently, as if he was going to vomit out his heart. Ning Xuemo was speechless. Her fingers slightly tightened. Ji Yunhuang's face was pale and there was blood at the corner of his lips. He was coughing up blood. It was obvious that his heart was injured. She asked, "I heard that Ding Qi had to be with you for 3 years before she could leave. You're so weak now. Is it because she died in advance? Do you want Di Zun to save you?" Chapter 1134. Ji Yunhuang finally managed to stop coughing, but when he heard Ning Xuemo's words, it was as if he had been slapped in the face. His expression changed. "No." He took a few steps back and his voice became even softer. "No. No." He seemed to be crying and laughing at the same time. "She found the serene orchid grass for me, it can undo that function." He trembled as he took out a dried blue grass and looked at Shen Zholi who was sitting on the throne. A glimmer of hope finally appeared in his eyes as he knelt down. "Ancestor, I beg you to save Xueqing. I don't want this grass, I only want her back. I beg you, you must have a way." He was like a drowning man who had finally found a life-saving straw. He looked at Shen Zholi with eyes full of hope. Shen Zholi silently looked at Ji Yunhuang's soulless appearance. Ji Yunhuang's figure overlapped with Tian Xiaoshu's figure. That year, the disciple he was most proud of had also knelt down like this and begged him to save Ling Zai. In his previous life, Tian Xiaoshu had regretted it for the rest of his life. In order to make it up to this disciple, he had directly bestowed Tian Xueqing to him in this life. Who would have thought? In the end, the two of them were not fated to meet. Time passed bit by bit. The glimmer in Ji Yunhuang's eyes became weaker and weaker. He was like a drowning man as he said in panic, "Ancestor." Shen Zholi finally opened his mouth, his tone carrying a trace of coldness. "Since you don't love her, why not let her go?" Ji Yunhuang's body stiffened. He painfully lowered his head and said in a trembling voice, "She is my crown princess. She cannot die." Ning Xuemo secretly sighed. Even now, Ji Yunhuang still refused to recognize his feelings for Tian Xueqing. She faintly interrupted from the side. "Crown princess? If you want, there are many women who can be your crown princess. Since you don't love her, what does the crown princess's life or death have to do with you? Now that the rules of the cauldron have been broken, you can continue to be a glorious crown prince after you consume this grass." Don't you hate her so much that you want her to die? Now, isn't this more to your liking? Ji Yunhuang closed his eyes. Ning Xuemo was right. He had always thought that he hated her so much that his teeth were itching. But he never thought that she would die. She never thought she would leave so soon. He thought that she would pester him for the rest of his life. He thought that their fates would never be separated. Who would have thought? It wasn't until the moment he saw her sink into the ground that his heart ached. Only then did he realize that she was like a wooden wedge that pierced into his heart. He could no longer pull it out. Unknowingly, his gaze had started to revolve around her. He thought that he had noticed her because he hated her too much, but he didn't know that this hatred was actually mixed with love. Because he loved her too much, he hated her. He hated her for using underhanded means to make him unable to leave her. He hated her for scheming so that she could become the crown princess. He knew that she loved him, but as proud as he was, how could he allow himself to be plotted against by her? As long as the incantation was not removed, he would feel uncomfortable and angry whenever he looked at her. That day, he absent-mindedly accompanied Shui Mo to teach her how to write. When the guard told him that the crown princess wanted to see him, his heart couldn't help but beat wildly. He was both excited and nervous. Ever since Ji Yunhuang and Shui Mo got together, she never took the initiative to look for him again. This time, she must be looking for him for something. She must be plotting something. Chapter 1135. Ji Yunhuang told himself over and over again that he could not be fooled by her. He could not be fooled by her. He tried his best to calm his wildly beating heart and calmly summoned Tian Xueqing in. She was still wearing her sky-blue clothes, and her expression was distant and indifferent as she stood there. She indifferently said, "Your Highness, I will remove the curse for you." At that moment, he was both excited and disappointed. He deliberately said coldly, "Why are you doing this? What are you plotting this time?" Tian Xueqing only smiled faintly. "Xueqing only wants to set your highness free." Seeing her smile, his heart suddenly ached. He thought that this was probably her plan to loosen the reins only to grasp them better. She knew that with this curse on him, she would not be able to obtain his heart. However, if she removed the curse, he might treat her well and grow old with her. Looking at her indifferent expression, he said dryly, "After this matter is done, this prince will compensate you." Tian Xueqing only smiled faintly. "All right." A light breeze blew past, and she had a faint smile on her face. Her gaze was distant, and her blue dress fluttered in the wind. She looked like a fairy that had accidentally landed in the mortal world, and would leave with the wind at any time. Ji Yunhuang suddenly felt a sense of fear of losing her. He unconsciously promised, "This prince will let you be this prince's crown prince consort for a lifetime." Tian Xueqing's gaze was still indifferent. He did not know why, but he deliberately emphasized the words "a lifetime," as if he naively believed that as long as she agreed, they would be together for a lifetime. From the beginning to the end, he did not touch Shui Mo. He only treated her as a younger sister, a tool to stimulate Tian Xueqing. During the trip to the ice field, Tian Xueqing had suffered a lot for the serene orchid grass, but her expression had always been indifferent. Her gaze towards him did not have a trace of emotion. He was terrified, he was afraid that Tian Xueqing really did not have any feelings for him, so he used Shui Mo to stimulate her and scold her. Looking at her occasionally revealing sadness, his heart ached terribly, but there was also a trace of joy. Her sadness proved that she still had feelings for him, but when she was sad, his heart also bled. Every moment was a torment of love and hate. He did not expect that she would be so determined to jump down to save Shui Mo. At that moment, his heart almost stopped beating. While digging through the ground, he was so flustered that his entire body was trembling, and his mind was blank. However, he subconsciously thought that when she came out, he must tell her that he didn't care about the serene orchid grass or the ink. He only wanted her. He wanted her to stay by his side forever. The moment she rushed out, he almost wanted to kneel on the ground and thank the heavens. However, very soon, she was caught by the tentacles. He wanted to drag her up, but his whole body was powerless as she slid down with him. Every word of hers pierced his heart, causing him so much pain that his entire body trembled. He couldn't say a single word and could only call out her name again and again with a pale face. He held on to her tightly, as if he was holding on to the only salvation in his life. The moment she let go, he felt as if his entire world had instantly collapsed, falling apart. It was as if the one who had fallen into the endless abyss was not her, but himself. He had been abandoned by the entire world, and from then on, he could only spend his days in boundless darkness and pain. He dug 3 feet into the ground, but he could no longer find her and the endless tentacles. He thought that the venerable emperor would definitely be able to save Qian Xueqing, so he rushed back to the Sun-Moon sect as fast as lightning, but he kept hearing that the venerable emperor was busy. Chapter 1136. Thus, he waited bitterly day after day. Day after day, he was tormented by the pain. In his dreams, Qian Xueqing's green robe was stained with blood. She looked at him indifferently and said, "Let's not meet again in the next life." He missed her every day and was tormented every night. Ji Yunhuang finally recognized his feelings. He begged Shenjiuli again and again, "Ancestor, I beg you. I beg you. I just want to see her one more time. See her one more time. Ancestor, please summon her soul." Shenjiuli looked at him for a moment and sighed. Finally, he nodded. He waved his hand and a white light condensed in his palm. The white light gradually became transparent and a strange scene flashed across it. Ji Yunhuang held his breath, afraid that he would disturb Shenjiuli and let him accidentally miss it. After a long time, Shenjiuli shook his head and said, "No." Ji Yunhuang held his breath and his face turned pale. "What do you mean no? Her soul is not there. Why?" Shenjiuli also seemed to be puzzled. After a long time, he finally opened his mouth and said, "If her soul is not there, there can only be 2 possibilities. First, she is not dead. Second, her soul has already been scattered." Ji Yunhuang sat down on the ground and his face turned pale. He had seen Qian Xueqing being dragged into the ground with his own eyes. It was impossible for her to still be alive. Could it be that her soul had already been scattered? This thought made Ji Yunhuang's whole body tremble. Had she already completely disappeared from this world? No, no. Impossible. This can't be the result. He stood up and said crazily, "I don't believe it, I don't believe it. I don't believe that my fate is like this. I don't believe that Xueqing's fate is like this. I must have been cursed. Xueqing must still be somewhere. She must be waiting for me to save her somewhere. I must go and save her." He turned into a ray of white light and suddenly rushed out. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Ning Xuemo only felt that her heart had sunk into ice water. She sat on the chair motionlessly. Could it be that as long as they were her friends, they would be unlucky? Yang Ziyuan jumped off the cliff with Yi Feng in her arms. Qian Xueqing was scared out of her wits. Ji Yunhuang was delirious. Was this a coincidence or was it that her fate as a cursed loner had unknowingly affected the people around her? She suddenly felt her entire body turn cold, so cold that even her soul was trembling. She wanted to jump up and hide in a place where no one was around. She couldn't get close to anyone, or that person would die. She did not know when Shenjiuli had appeared beside her. He frowned when he saw her dazed look. He put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Xuemo." Ning Xuemo murmured, "God, Qian Xueqing is also dead. Am I really a jinx?" Shenjiuli touched her head. "Xuemo, this has nothing to do with you." Ning Xuemo suddenly tilted her head backwards, avoiding the great god's hand. She inwardly took a deep breath and forced a smile. Great God, she didn't know how to continue. She was so close to the god. Could it be that she also? This thought made her a little scared. She subconsciously distanced herself from the god. Shenjiuli's hand landed on empty air, so he slowly retracted his hand. He looked at her quietly. His gaze was like the surface of a lake, with slight ripples in it. Although she hid it well, Shenjiuli could still read the uncertainty and faint fear in her eyes. He sighed again and raised his hand to hug her. "Xuemo, don't be afraid." Chapter 1137. Shinjoli stroked her hair again and again, as if he was comforting a child who didn't know what to do. His voice was especially gentle at this moment. My destiny is hard, you can't subdue me. Ning Xuemore suddenly felt a lump in her throat and almost cried. Guru, the feeling of being held in someone's arms and being comforted in a soft voice was so wonderful. It made her heart feel sour and bitter, but at the same time, she was greatly touched. It was like a warm current slowly flowing into her heart, washing away her anxiety and uneasiness little by little, leaving only a sense of satisfaction and happiness. Ning Xuemore tiptoed and gently kissed Shinjoli. With a sigh, she whispered, Guru, only you. She only had him. Shinjoli responded by lowering his head, hugging her tightly and deepening the kiss. When the kiss ended, Ning Xuemore's dark eyes finally had a glimmer of light. She leaned into Shinjoli's arms. Guru, I only have you now. You're not allowed to leave me, you're not allowed to turn your back on me. You're not allowed to. Something. She didn't say the last two words. Her coquettish tone made Shinjoli couldn't help but kiss her again. He kissed her all over until she was out of breath. He lowered his head and solemnly said in her ear, Xuemore, I will never turn my back on you. Ning Xuemore leaned into Shinjoli's arms. She smelled the cool fragrance on his body and listened to his steady and powerful heartbeat. Suddenly, she felt sleepy. It was like a person who had walked in the desert for days and finally reached an oasis. While it was sweet and wonderful, it also gradually gave birth to a sense of exhaustion after a storm. However, the atmosphere now was so wonderful that she couldn't bear to fall asleep. Shinjoli could tell that she was sleepy. He caressed her hair and said, I'll give you a day off today. Go and sleep. Then, he carried her in a princess carry and sent her back to her room. Ning Xuemore nestled in his arms at ease. Occasionally, she would raise her eyes and see Shinjoli's perfect side profile. Her heart was in a trance. She was really lucky to be able to make such an outstanding man fall so deeply in love with her. Most importantly, they loved each other deeply. She slowly closed her eyes and fell into a deep dream. Everything before him was pitch black. Ning Xuemore seemed to have fallen into a bottomless abyss. She kept sinking until she sank into a dark end. She stood up and suddenly saw a little girl standing not far away in the middle of the black smoke. She was dressed in a bright red dress and was fair and tender. Her facial features could not be seen clearly, but based on his intuition, it should be an exquisite and sweet face. Judging from his figure, he seemed to be around 3 or 4 years old. A childish voice sounded, You're here. Ning Xuemore took a step back to put some distance between them. She asked cautiously, Who are you? Why are you here? The little girl giggled like a little angel. However, in this empty and silent abyss, it seemed a little creepy. Finally, she laughed enough and said sweetly, I am you. You and I are one. Ning Xuemore's heart skipped a beat. Could this little girl be the demon that was causing trouble in her dantian? She was even more cautious, but she did not show it. She also revealed a relaxed smile. Whose child are you? Why are you talking nonsense? The little girl did not speak. She just tilted her head and looked at her with an innocent face, motionless. Ning Xuemore just looked at her quietly with a calm face. She was actually thinking of a countermeasure and how to leave this place. She did not expect that the monster in her dantian would actually take a human form. This was not good news. Chapter 1138. The little girl curled her lips and squinted her eyes like a lazy kitten. Momo, you are me and I am you. Don't keep thinking about how to deal with me. Ning Xuemore was startled. This brat knew how to read minds. The little girl stretched lazily and said impatiently, I said that I am you, so I know all of your thoughts. Don't try to avoid me. There was a hint of mockery in her playful voice. Ning Xuemore did not say anything. She did not know what to do now. When the opponent knew all of your thoughts, it was definitely a terrifying thing. The little girl stretched out her small hand and grabbed a wisp of black gas and played with it. Her voice was still soft and childish, with a hint of naivety. Momo, are you really not planning to leave the great god? You will jinx him to death. Ning Shuamore's heart skipped a beat, but her expression was very calm. She tried her best to empty her mind and not think about anything. The little girl was stunned, then she clapped her hands and giggled. Momo is really smart, you can actually empty your mind. But, it's useless, her sweet voice continued. Momo, look. First it was Yi Feng, then it was Yang Ziyuan, then it was Tian Xueqing, then it was Ji Yunhuang. Her voice gradually became softer. Suddenly, her voice sounded like thunder and every word was frightening. Momo, who do you think is the next one? Who is the next one? Who is the next one? The thunderous voice replayed in Ning Shuamore's ears again and again. Her body could not help but tense up and she was extremely nervous. She closed her eyes and retorted loudly, there is no next one. The little girl's voice was very strange, as if it directly sounded in her mind, making Ning Shuamore unable to block her ears and refuse to listen. The voice became softer again and changed into a sweet child's voice, but it carried a devilish temptation. Momo, there are many people you care about. Who do you think is the next one? Is it Uncle Zhong? Tom? Or Shijue? Helian Xiao? Or is he the sovereign of this world? He took you in as his disciple, got injured because of you, and had the closest relationship with you. Ning Shuamore couldn't help but think of the Almighty's face. That voice suddenly screamed, it's him. It was him. He'll be the next one to die from your curse. Ning Shuamore felt a knot in her heart. She was so shocked by the sound that she almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. She looked at the child and said coldly, I'm telling you, I won't. The image of the Almighty holding her in his arms, combing her hair, and comforting her flashed through her mind. Shuamore, don't be afraid. Her confidence was boosted, and a warm current flowed through her heart, as though it could cleanse the endless abyss. The little girl raised her eyebrows slightly and revealed a cute smile. Momo, let's wait and see. With a gentle wave of her hand, Ning Shuamore felt her body become light and she slowly floated up. Chapter 1139. She slowly calmed down and used a cleansing spell to dry herself. Then, she got up and poured herself a glass of water. While drinking the water, she sorted out her messy thoughts. The dream just now was still vivid in her mind. She remembered the little girl's words word for word. She said she was her. What did that mean? Was she suffering from schizophrenia? Impossible. Was this her inner demon? An inner demon that had materialized? Could it be that she was a jinx and had a destiny of being an axe soldier because of this little girl in her body? The more she thought about it, the more frightened she became. No, she had to discuss it with the Almighty tomorrow and let him take a look at her, but now, she needed to rest first. Thinking of this, Ning Shuamore slowly laid down on the bed. But when she closed her eyes, her soul seemed to sink. She was so frightened that she opened her eyes. She was definitely having a nightmare. She had to find the Almighty now. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. She ran out like a whirlwind and rushed to Shinjoli's main hall. When she reached the main hall, she was stunned. The main hall was still brightly lit. Did the Almighty not sleep? She walked in slowly and saw Shinjoli sitting cross-legged on the big bed. His eyes were slightly closed. There was a colorful light flowing around him, giving him a layer of holy light. The Almighty was meditating. It was better for her not to disturb the Almighty. Once a cultivator was disturbed, it was easy for him to go crazy. Ning Shuamore knew this very well. She gently climbed to the other side of the bed and quietly hugged her knees as she looked at the Almighty's back. Anyway, she couldn't sleep now. Once she slept, she would see the weird little girl teasing her. She might as well cultivate with the Almighty. She looked at the Almighty's back view and nodded slowly. Eventually, she fell asleep. Someone gently laid her down and covered her with a blanket. He sighed softly in her ear, silly child. She unconsciously reached out her hand and mumbled, Almighty. Shinjoli grabbed her hand and said softly, I'm here. Hearing this response, Ning Shuamore finally felt relieved. She found a comfortable position in his arms and fell asleep. Shinjoli hugged her and flicked off the lights. He had a dreamless night. When Ning Shuamore opened her eyes, she saw a field of snow white. She was stunned for a moment. She raised her head and was met with a pair of deep blue eyes. "You're awake?" Shinjoli asked quietly, holding a strand of her hair in his hand. Ning Shuamore was a little dazed from her sleep. She had an ignorant look on her face and looked particularly easy to bully. Shinjoli's eyes darkened. He hugged her and kissed her on the lips. He did not hesitate to give her a French kiss. When the kiss ended, Ning Shuamore was still in a daze. "Guru, why are you on my bed?" Shinjoli was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself and would pounce on her one day, so they had been sleeping in separate rooms. Shinjoli's eyes had a touch of amusement. He said with a faint smile, "Who climbed onto my bed in the middle of the night when I was meditating? Then you slept like a little dead pig." Ning Shuamore then remembered that she had rushed over last night. She wanted to cultivate with the Almighty, but she didn't expect to fall asleep first. She couldn't help but blush. She coughed softly, cough cough, that, Shinjoli's eyes had a deeper smile. He couldn't help but tease her, "Can't resist your yearning?" Chapter 1140. Ning Shuamore glared at him, coughed lightly, and got up from the bed. She always felt that when talking in bed, the topic would uncontrollably drift in a certain direction, and then it would get out of hand. After sitting up, she finally remembered her purpose of coming here. She said seriously, "Almighty, I have something important to tell you." Shinjoli finally got up lazily. With his movements, his collar was slightly messy, revealing his white jade-like chest. His voice carried a unique laziness when he just woke up. "What's the matter? Almighty, you Ivildor. Can't you tidy up your clothes a bit?" Ning Shuamore glanced at him and then looked away. She was almost seduced by the Almighty to the point that she forgot her business. She sorted out the messy thoughts in her head and said seriously, "Almighty, I had a dream last night." She recounted the conversation she had with the little girl last night without holding anything back. Shinjoli's expression slowly became serious. Without waiting for her to finish, he pulled her wrist and quietly took her pulse. After a while, he let go of her hand and said calmly, "It's nothing. It's just an inner demon." Ning Shuamore's heart skipped a beat. "Inner demon? What inner demon?" Shinjoli patted her head and took advantage of the opportunity to pull her down. Every immortal cultivator will have an inner demon before breaking through to Earth rank level 8. Master will teach you a set of mental cultivation methods. Come, sleep with Master for a while. Ning Shuamore, come, sleep with Master for a while. Almighty, don't you think that your words are shocking? Whose disciple has the ability to sleep with others? It was strange. Ning Shuamore had just woken up, but in the Almighty's arms, she fell into a deep sleep again. Shinjoli looked at her in his arms with a serious expression. He didn't expect that the inner demon in her body had already materialized. At this time, Ning Shuamore was already asleep. Naturally, the inner demon in her body was also asleep. He hadn't prepared all the ingredients yet, so he couldn't awaken the inner demon in her. His hand was as fast as lightning, and he tapped on one of her acupuncture points. A ray of white light slowly seeped in and gradually disappeared. After doing all this, Shinjoli let out a long sigh of relief. Looking at her relaxed sleeping face, the expression in his eyes changed several times, as if he had to make a difficult decision. In the end, he sighed softly. "I can't drag this out any longer." When Ning Shuamore woke up again, the Almighty was not by her side. She felt that she was about to go crazy from sleeping, so she left the main hall and strolled around outside. Sunset clouds filled the sky above Heavenly Sound Peak, but Ning Shuamore couldn't find the great deity anywhere. In the end, when she arrived at Luoyin Cliff, she saw the great deity standing there. His white robe was loose and fluttering in the wind. His back was facing her, as if he could leave with the wind at any moment. Ning Shuamore pursed her lips and stepped forward to stand beside the Almighty. "Almighty, is there something on your mind?" Shinjoli put his arm around her waist and looked at her. No, he said. After a while, Shinjoli spoke again. He stroked her hair and said lightly, Shuemor, I have to go on a long trip. Ning Shuemor's heart skipped a beat. Where are you going? I'll go with you. Shinjoli paused for a moment and continued to comb her hair. No, only I can go there. Your skills are still too weak to go. You have to stay at the Tianyin Peak. You can't go anywhere, understand? Ning Shuemor looked up at him and stared into his eyes. Is it very dangerous? Shinjoli patted her head and nodded silently. Ning Shuemor tightened her grip on the Almighty's robe. She took a deep breath and asked, When will you be back? Chapter 1141. Shinjoli muttered, half a month at most. All right, half a month wasn't too long. She would just wait here. Her gaze fell on Shinjoli. How many attendants did you bring? She would feel more at ease if there were more people. Shinjoli shook his head slightly. Only I can go to that place. No one else can enter. Don't worry, I know what to do. Since he said this, Ning Shuemor could only nod her head. All right, you have to come back in one piece. Shinjoli couldn't help but smile. Of course. The thing that wants to make me incomplete hasn't been born yet. This sentence was very imposing, but it also made Ning Shuemor feel more at ease. She knew that he was telling the truth. In this world, she really hadn't seen anyone who could be his opponent. Although it was a lonely world without opponents, it could make his family feel at ease and know that he would be fine. She hugged his arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. I believe you. I'll wait for you to come back. I'll wait for you to come back. It was just a few simple words, but it made Shinjoli's heart feel warm. All these years, no matter where he went, he came and went alone. He never said hello to anyone, and he never made anyone wait for him. He was as free as the wind. But now, there was a tie, a warm tie. This kind of tie finally gave birth to a kind of desire. He longed to come back before he even set off. He lowered his eyes to look at her. She had been hugging his arm tightly, as if he would disappear immediately. There was even a hint of sadness in her bright eyes. He couldn't help but laugh. Don't you want to keep a little distance from me? Don't you want a little private space occasionally? Ah, that's true. Ning Shuemor let go of his arm and patted him on the shoulder like a brother. Go, Di-Zun. Go find what you want to find. The flowers haven't bloomed yet, so you can slowly return. Shinjoli was speechless. He casually pulled her into his embrace, and there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. Do you miss me so much that you can't sleep? The great God also knows how to tease. You know how to say sweet nothings now? Ning Shuemor raised her hand and rubbed his chin. Then, she raised her fingertips. It was the standard gesture of a young ruffian teasing a virtuous woman. However, she was a little shorter than Di-Zun, so it was a little difficult for her to do this. Guru, after you leave, I will eat and sleep well. I will live my own personal world well. She actually liked being alone. Being alone was as free as the wind, and she could go wherever she wanted. He was extraordinarily independent. She didn't know when it started, but as long as she was by his side, she couldn't help but want to lean on him and snuggle up to him. It turned out that when love came, even a strong and independent woman would want a warm embrace to shelter her from the wind and rain. Even she herself didn't believe that there would be a day when she would be like a little bird that relied on others. However, she naturally showed it when she was beside him. She didn't feel uncomfortable at all and didn't feel out of place at all. It was as if this was how it should be. These days, she had been sticking to the great God. They really didn't separate day and night. Other than real physical intimacy, they did everything that couples should do. She really couldn't stand being together all day long. Now that the great God was going to leave for half a month, she really had to plan this half a month and make it more meaningful. She was thinking about what to do in this half a month when Shinjoli patted her head and glanced at her. What are you thinking about? Chapter 1142. I'm thinking about what I should do in this half a month. There seems to be a lot of things to do. I haven't taken a good look around the Sun Moon sect or chatted with the junior disciples. I haven't even met all the senior disciples. This time, I want to visit all of them. Ning Xuemore counted with her fingers. After counting, she suddenly felt that half a month wasn't enough. Great God, you don't have to rush this time. You don't have to worry about me. It's fine even if it takes another 10 days or half a month. Ning Xuemore generously gave him more time. Shenjiuli was speechless. He raised his hand and knocked on her head. What are you thinking about? In the half a month when I'm not here, you have to practice hard. You're not allowed to leave the heavenly sound peak. You have to master the heart technique that I taught you. When I come back, I'll check on your homework. If I find out that you're disobedient, I have ways to punish you. Ning Xuemore placed a hand on his shoulder and leaned on him. What kind of punishment? Ning Xuemore asked. What punishment? Shenjiuli held her mischievous hand and narrowed his eyes. He seemed to be threatening and teasing her at the same time. I'll torture you until you're better off dead. This sentence could be interpreted in several ways. Ning Xuemore suddenly remembered that these days, the great god had some bad habits when they were together. Her heart trembled. The great god looked calm and untainted. In fact, once the great god let loose, he was really unrestrained. Especially when he was with her, his tricks were too much for her to handle. Other than that last step, she had already been devoured by him until there was nothing left of her, not even the dregs of tofu left. Ning Xuemore was naturally not a passive person. Her eyes moved and her lips curled into a smile. She suddenly raised her head and hugged his neck. She gently bit his earlobe. Great God, if I listen to you obediently, what kind of reward will you give me when you come back? Her warm breath lingered in his ears as her small white teeth bit his earlobe. It was slightly painful and ticklish, but that ticklish feeling almost reached his heart. It made him feel as if there was an electric current flowing through his body, and his lower abdomen felt bloated and painful. His eyes deepened, and he pulled this coquettish little demoness off his body. With a casual press, he pressed her down on the stone table beside him. He leaned over and looked into her eyes. What reward do you want? His voice was slightly hoarse. Ning Xuemore blinked. A reward? Let me think. She was deep in thought when she suddenly thought of something. Great God, the congealed frost fruit on the crimson afterglow peak tastes pretty good. Why don't you bring it back as a reward for me? Shenjiuli, this bad girl. She had clearly brought up an ambiguous topic and looked like she was going to tease him. Yet, the topic of conversation suddenly changed to this. He smiled and touched her red lips with his finger. Good. If you're obedient, not only will I bring you the congealed frost fruit, I will also give you a mysterious reward. How about that? What mysterious reward? Ning Xuemore grabbed his hand. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed, but you will definitely remember it for the rest of your life. Shenjiuli kept her in suspense. All right. The great god always liked to keep people in suspense. If he didn't say anything, even if you used torture, you wouldn't be able to force him to say it. So Ning Xuemore didn't ask any more questions. The two of them were silent for a while. They both knew that they were going to separate. Although they didn't say anything, there were traces of sorrow that began to spread. Ning Xuemore held his hand and interlocked their fingers. Great God, come back soon. Chapter 1143. Don't run around and don't leave the Tianyin Peak. If you're bored, wait for me to come back and bring you there. Shenjiuli couldn't help but remind her again. Ning Xuemore burst out laughing. Guru, you're so long-winded too. He was treating her like a child, but it still made her feel warm and touched. Shenjiuli was silent for a moment, then he finally said, Xuemore, wait for me. Ning Xuemore nodded and said seriously, I'll be right here and won't run around. I'll practice diligently and wait for you to come back. On the first day after the guru left, Ning Xuemore felt like she was finally free. She practiced for the whole morning and took a nap. In the afternoon, she called Yelu Jing'an up and chatted with him for a while to understand the situation in the Sun-Moon sect. She slept alone at night and didn't run to the guru's bedroom to say goodnight like before. She wasn't used to it, but she just smiled and rolled around on the bed. She said, "The feeling of freedom is really good." Then she lay down and fell asleep. She didn't have any dreams until the next morning. The next day, she looked at the sun that had risen high in the sky and was a little stunned. Then she jumped up again. Too late. Too late. The guru asked her to wake up at dawn every day to report to him for practice. Now it was the end of the morning and she was late for almost 4 hours. She would be punished by the guru. She packed up quickly like a whirlwind, but when she was about to rush out of the door, she suddenly remembered that the guru had left and wouldn't supervise her anymore. She heaved a sigh of relief and slowly ran to the practice field. She practiced there for a while and it was already noon. She was quite careless with her practice that day, so she took it as a holiday for herself. When it was time to sleep at night, she said goodnight to herself and lay down to sleep. Speaking of which, it was strange. At first, she was afraid that the weird little girl in her dantian would pull her into some void to cause trouble, but she slept peacefully for 2 days. That little bastard didn't come to disturb her again, which made her very relieved. On the 3rd day, she didn't wake up early. She got out of bed lazily and dressed herself lazily. She didn't know why, but everything she did was a little emotionless and she couldn't lift her spirits. After she finished practicing, she couldn't help but run to the Almighty's bedroom to take a look. Then, he ran to his practice room and began to practice his mental cultivation method. Just like that, another day passed. The 4th day, the 5th day, the 6th day, and even the 7th day, she continued to work and rest as usual, but she couldn't help but count the days with her fingers. His concern was like the land after the spring breeze, sprouting green buds of longing and spreading. On the 8th day, she finally couldn't help but take out the voice transmission talisman. She picked it up, put it down, and picked it up again. In the end, he put it away. The Almighty had said that the place he was going to was a forbidden area, and the voice transmission talisman would not be able to reach him. Even if she could contact him, Ning Xuemore had no intention of contacting him. What if the Almighty was fighting with a certain fiend? If she contacted him blindly, he would be distracted. Time flowed like water, slowly slipping away as she waited. When it was close to half a month, she suddenly wished that time would flow slower. In the deepest part of her heart, she was afraid that he wouldn't come back. The feeling of freedom that she felt when he first left was long gone. There was only a heavy longing and a heavy worry. The Almighty would come back. The Almighty would be fine. Perhaps when she woke up, the Almighty would look at her from her bedside and then wake her up to practice. Chapter 1144. She comforted herself like this every night before she went to bed. However, when she woke up the next day, she was disappointed to see an empty house. "Guru, I've been waiting here for you to come back. Why haven't you come back yet? Heavenly Lone Star, you're a heavenly Lone Star. Your friends and family will all die because of you. You'll always be alone." A childish voice rang out in his mind. It was a voice that sounded childish and tempting. "That's not true. That was all nonsense. I don't believe such a thing." Another voice in his head refuted subconsciously. "You don't believe it? Then are Yi Feng and Yang Ziyuan dead? Is Tian Shueqing dead? They died because of you. They didn't have a good ending because of you." "Bullshit. Shut up. Their deaths were just a coincidence. I tried my best. Your friends are like quicksand. The tighter you hold on to them, the harder it is to hold on to them. Poor child, you have indeed tried your best, but your efforts will only accelerate their tragedy. Why don't you let them go? Turn into a demon, hand you over to me, and I will be able to change your fate. You will become happy, and you will no longer have any worries." The voice guided him patiently. "Dream on. Dream on. What kind of monster are you? Get the hell out of there. Ning Shuamore screamed as she woke up from her nightmare drenched in sweat. She sat up abruptly. The demonic voice finally disappeared from her head. She took a deep breath. Her fingers touched her dantian. Her fingertips were slightly cold. There was a monster living inside her, a demon-like child. The child's voice started to appear in her head frequently a few days ago. She had used her inner vision to check many times, but she couldn't see the child. She could only see a chaotic darkness. It was as boundless as the end of the world. It made her feel frightened. The guru said that she had a demon in her heart. As long as she practiced diligently, she would be able to get rid of the demon. However, these days, she had a feeling that the demon was getting stronger. There were a few times when she felt like she was in a dream. It annoyed her to no end. She jumped out of bed, washed up a little, and went out. The scenery outside the door was still the same. The trees, the courtyard, the mountain rocks. Every blade of grass, every tree, every pavilion, and every courtyard were as beautiful as a painting, but she had no interest in admiring them. It had been a month. The Almighty had been gone for a month. There was no news from him for a month. No matter how she tried to contact him, she couldn't get in touch with him, and she could only be trapped on the heavenly sound peak, unable to do anything. Every day, other than cultivating, she could only stroll around the heavenly sound peak, unable to go anywhere else. In the beginning, she was worried that if she blindly contacted him, it would distract him. She might even be in danger, so she suppressed her emotions and waited patiently every day. However, after half a month, she began to lose her cool and began to try to contact him using the sound transmission talisman. However, he couldn't get in touch with her, and she didn't seem to want to pick up. What happened to him? Could it be that he had encountered a great danger? Could it be that his life was in danger? All kinds of worries came one after another, making her restless day and night. However, at this time, the demon in her heart was getting stronger day by day. If her mind wavered a little, it would take advantage of the situation and make her even more confused. She went to the Almighty's bedroom, and everything in the palace was still the same. She didn't want to worry the Almighty, so she endured it and stayed on the peak day after day. She really wanted to find the Almighty, but she didn't know where he had gone. She could only wait helplessly. She felt like she was going to turn into a stone waiting for her husband. After cleaning up the debris on the ground, she wiped the other things again. When he was by her side, she didn't feel that time was unbearable, but after he left, she felt a bone-piercing loneliness and longing. She had never been so concerned about someone in her life. It turned out that worrying about someone was so unsettling that it was hard to calm down. Seeing that it was dark outside, she took out the sound-transmitting talisman and tried to contact him again. Still, it was to no avail. The sound-transmitting talisman didn't light up at all. Chapter 1146. Great God. Shinjoli, regardless of whether you found that thing or not, at least send me a message. Even if it's just a hey, it's fine. As long as I know that you're safe, why won't you say a word to me? She simply lay on Shinjoli's bed. Her eyes were wide open, but she didn't dare to sleep. Now, as long as she closed her eyes, she would dream and be harassed by her inner demons. There seemed to be a slight noise at the door. Her heart jumped, and she immediately turned around to look. Then, she held her breath. The door creaked open, and a white figure stood at the door. The moonlight gilded his back with a layer of faint silver, and his handsome face was half hidden in the darkness. Although Ning Shuamore couldn't see his face clearly, she could recognize him from his figure and temperament. Shinjoli. He finally came back. He still knew to come back. At this moment, Ning Shuamore's mind was blown. She was ecstatic, but her heart was filled with grievances. Her nose was sour, and tears welled up in her eyes. Did he know that she was worried to death? Did he know that she was almost crazy from worrying about him? Did he know that she missed him so much that she almost broke down? Before she could think of what to do, she had already jumped up from the bed and fiercely threw herself at him. Great God! Why did you come back? She wanted to fiercely shout a few words at him, but just as she said one sentence, her throat seemed to be choked, and she couldn't continue. She directly threw herself into his arms and desperately hugged his waist. Tears flowed down her cheeks, and her nose couldn't breathe. Why did you come back so late? Do you know that I was worried to death? With great difficulty, she suppressed her grievances and wanted to shout a few words at him, but her body stiffened, and she suddenly opened her eyes wide. A sword. A sword the color of the moonlight. It fiercely pierced through her chest, accurately pierced through her heart, and came out from her back. That sword was extremely sharp and was a gift from her to him. He had always kept it with him, but now it had become the culprit behind her assassination. The sword was so sharp that she didn't even feel it when it pierced her flesh. By the time she reacted, she was already skewered on his sword like a candied hawthorn. The delayed pain made her face turn pale, and her eyes widened in disbelief. His face was reflected in her eyes. She finally saw his face clearly, and her heart felt as if it had been thrown into ice water. Wu Mo. The person who came was not Shenjioli, but his former substitute, Wu Mo. Wu Mo's figure was exactly the same as Shenjioli's. Even their facial features were almost the same. They were at least 99% similar. If one wasn't the person closest to them, it would be hard to tell them apart when they stood together. The only difference between these two people was that Wu Mo was always expressionless. When his sword pierced through Ning Xuemo's body, he didn't even move his eyebrows. He was as cold as a statue. As for Shenjioli, although he was also incomparably cold, he often had some expressions on his face. Ning Xuemo had been with him for a long time, so she could tell at a glance. When Wu Mo was punished by Shenjioli and imprisoned in the underground cold prison, Ning Xuemo and the Almighty had almost forgotten the existence of this person after they met. She occasionally asked who this Wu Mo was, and the Almighty's answer was somewhat zen. He said that Wu Mo was the one who had been with him for the longest time. Since he could remember, Wu Mo had been by his side as his substitute. Other than that, there was no further explanation. Chapter 1147. The Almighty's explanation was ambiguous. Later on, because of other things, she forgot to ask him again. Later on, when she thought about it, she felt that since Wu Mo had been by the Almighty's side for as long as he could remember, and the two of them looked so similar, there was only one possibility. Wu Mo was the Almighty's twin brother. She did not know why, but he only wanted to be the Almighty's substitute. Later on, because too many things happened and the Almighty urged her to practice martial arts, she didn't have the time to think about Wu Mo. She only knew that he was punished by the Almighty and was locked up. She didn't expect that he would appear here today. She thought that the Almighty had finally returned. She was so excited that she didn't think twice before throwing herself at him. She was anxious to hug him and feel his real body to soothe her surging emotions. She didn't expect that he would be a substitute. She also didn't expect that he would assassinate her without saying a word. This sword was ruthless and didn't give her any chance to live. It was obvious that Wu Mo really wanted to kill her. At that moment, Ning Xuemo couldn't think too much. Fortunately, she used to be a secret agent and had a strong psychological quality. She could quickly calm down when she received a fatal blow. Almost instinctively, she slapped him with her palm, using the empty-handed blade block technique to attack him. Wu Mo probably didn't expect that she could still fight back when her heart was stabbed. Moreover, her attack was aimed at the enemy's vital point. The angle was tricky and the palm was strong. Even if Wu Mo was in a hurry, he couldn't block her attack. He subconsciously let go of his hand and took a step back. Ning Xuemo also took a few steps back when he let go of her hand. Blood flowed down the sword and dripped on the clean floor like blooming red spider lilies. Her face was deathly pale. She pressed her palm on the hilt of the moonlight sword. She was a doctor herself, so she naturally knew the consequences of being stabbed. Her heart meridian had been pierced, and her life was like a flickering candle flame in the wind, about to be extinguished at any time. Why do you want to kill me? This was what she didn't understand the most. She didn't have any deep hatred with him, right? Although he gave her a lot of problems when he pretended to be Shinjoli, he didn't mean to kill her. What was the reason this time? What was the reason for him to use his ultimate move on her as soon as they met? Why was the Almighty's moonlight sword in his hands? Thousands of questions swirled in her mind. After she asked this question, she quietly moved to the window. Since Wu Mo was standing at the door, she could only escape through the window if she wanted to ask for help. Unfortunately, the window was tightly shut. She had no choice but to break the window and jump out to call for help. But would she have the chance? She had yet to cultivate an immortal body, and the sword in her heart only had the word death. The reason why she could still stand here and not fall was because the sword had yet to be pulled out. Once the sword was pulled out, she would definitely die. That empty-handed blade block had almost used up all of her strength. Her vision was turning black, and there was a fishy taste in her mouth. Wu Mo looked at her coldly, but he did not follow up with another attack. He knew that with the power of his sword, she would not be able to survive. Hearing her question, he only coldly replied, "You must die. I can't let you harm him anymore." Was it because of her identity as a heavenly loner? Ning Xuemore took another step back, her face as pale as a sheet of paper. Chapter 1148. Ning Xuemore's eyes darkened. Where is he? Why is his sword in your hands? Even if you kill me, he won't let you go. She stumbled again and held onto the window for support. Wu Mo's eyes were as cold as ice and his thin lips slightly pursed. No matter where he is, it has nothing to do with you anymore. Go on your way and don't bother him in your next life. He approached Ning Xuemore step by step. He didn't expect this girl to be so tenacious. Even with a sword in her heart, she could still talk so much nonsense. Perhaps he should give her another blow to shut her up. His fingers emitted a faint white light and in a blink of an eye, it turned into the shape of a sword. Ning Xuemore held onto the window with her hand, but her heart was cold. In such a short time, her hands and feet had lost all their strength. Not to mention breaking the window, she couldn't even push it with all her might. Her vision blurred and she couldn't even stand straight. Tianyin Peak was the forbidden area of the Sun-Moon sect. All the disciples were not allowed to come up. Now, there was only her and Wu Mo. Even if she was lucky enough to escape from this hall, how could she escape from Wu Mo's pursuit? If she was fine, with her current martial arts, she might be able to deal with Wu Mo for a while. At least, she could delay until reinforcements arrived. But now, she only felt despair. She had never felt so hopeless before. She didn't expect that she would die here today. Shinjoli's figure flashed in her mind. Her fingers clenched again. She didn't even see him again. What happened to him? She looked on helplessly as the sword in Wu Mo's hand took shape again and was about to stab her again. She closed her eyes and waited for the fatal blow. Bang! The tightly closed window suddenly shattered. The shattering of the window was very unique. All the fragments were like whistling rain, bypassing Ning Xuemore who was in front of the window and shooting towards Wu Mo. Wu Mo's expression changed slightly. The sword in his hand flashed continuously and set up a protective shield around his body, blocking the fragments that were flying towards him like a storm. In the chaos of the fragments, he only saw a red shadow flash past the window. When he hurriedly threw away the broken pieces and looked at the window again, his pupils suddenly shrank. Not only was there no trace of the red-robed man in front of the window, there was also no trace of Ning Xuemore. Only the broken window was like a huge mouth, as if it was laughing at him. That woman must not be taken away, she must not be allowed to live. Wu Mo's silhouette rose, and he went out of the window like a drifting cloud. The grass and trees in the courtyard were the same as before, but he couldn't see any shadow of a person. There was a wizardry barrier on the mountain peak. Only disciples of Shinjoli could come and go as they pleased. That person wasn't from the Sun Moon sect. He couldn't have left without making a sound after kidnapping Ning Xuemor. Wu Mo quickly circled around the Tianyin peak. He didn't find the two people, but he found a gap in a hidden corner. There were a few drops of blood on the gap, as if it was telling him something. Wu Mo's fingers slowly clenched. Did he run away? However, that woman's heart had been fatally stabbed by him. Even if she was taken away, she wouldn't be able to survive. Ning Xuemor felt dizzy, but she subconsciously knew that someone had saved her. At this moment, that person was carrying her and escaping. That person's speed was extremely fast. Ning Xuemor was in a state of dizziness. She only felt a burst of light and shadow, and the sound of the wind was sharp like a whistle in her ears. However, she couldn't feel it blowing on her body. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.